it when you hit that like button and comment. It will grab the video, spread it around for more people to join in, and it's always more fun when we have more people joining in the comment section. Pretty exciting. I went to the Red Hot Chili Peppers concert last night, and I haven't been to a whole lot of concerts in my life. I mean, I've been to a few of them, and this was a lot of fun. It was at Ridgefield Amphitheater, big giant field behind basically some seating within the stage area. We sat, it was a little ways up. I mean, it was probably a couple 100 yards from the stage, so it was a little ways away, but sounded great. Band did wonderful. The Chili Peppers were awesome. Opening act, not so great. Wasn't real impressed with that, but it was a good time hanging out with my wife there at the show, and everybody was having a real good time. Nobody got out of hand or anything like that, so that was a lot of fun to do. All right, 73 people already. Let's do it. I'm going to be talking about why things are going to get worse. Now, I left an article down in the description with Goolsbee. I just want to make sure I said his name right. Goolsbee, who is being quoted within this article, talking about how things are going to get worse from their indicator of consumer debt delinquency is on the rise. Now, this is something that's pretty interesting. As I thought about it this morning when I was reading this article, I was thinking, wow, this is really interesting difference to what I think a lot of people are looking at when it comes to what the Federal Reserve is typically doing with their monetary policy. It's pretty simple, the idea of raising interest rates to put a burden on the consumer. And this would be like one of the signs of a burden on the consumer is the rise in delinquencies when it comes to something as like a credit card debt or car loan. But in this case, let's just kind of talk about credit card debt. So if you have like an issue in which that you are not earning enough money, you start using your credit card to make up or to supplement your income. And then pretty soon you get to a point where you can no longer make the payments on it and you start going into a delinquency. Now, when we think about this from like recessionary times, like this would make a lot of sense that you lose your job or something like that, you wouldn't be able to make your credit card payment because you were maybe in a situation in which that you couldn't get the income that you were looking for, maybe from that job loss or maybe a cut in hours that were leading up to a recession, was forcing you to use that credit card to begin with, right? So there has to be a reason in which that the credit card use was rising. And generally, it's not because people, it could be because people are feeling real good about, their income and, I guess decide that they want to take out credit card debt. Usually, in my opinion, when it comes to credit card debt, or at least the rise in credit card debt, is because of emergency purposes. Like, you either need to supplement your income because you don't have it, or you have an issue that's come up where you just don't have the funds, you need a new set of tires for your car or something like that. And you end up with this credit card debt because you just simply didn't have the income to pay for it to begin with. Okay, so if you have a rising credit card debt and you have a loss of your job or a loss of income, would be the reasonings going into the delinquency of it. But maybe it's a situation that's different. And now what would it look like if it was different? If you had employment, but you had a rise in your credit card, right? Credit card usage, and then started moving into delinquency, even though you had the job, right? Now, what could have been the situation like that is most likely a loss in income, right? You were making a certain amount of income, and then you lost that income. Now you have less, and you have to choose where it is that you're going to go, and most likely you're going to go into necessities, and things like a credit card are going to have to wait. Now, this is the case that we're facing, right? That where income is just not enough to handle it, right? Whether it was the cost of living from, food expenditures or whatever that has risen, it is now forcing us to make decisions on where it is that we are going to make our payments in credit cards at the end of the line. So now I think about like what it is that the Federal Reserve would typically be doing with their monetary policy in order to create the situations that would be appropriate for their monetary policy. See, the Federal Reserve looks at inflation just the same as everybody else, but they don't look at it in the way that we look at it, as what's the reasonings and causes behind it. See, we easily know. Money printer, that's it. Easy enough. What else do you need to know, right? But the Federal Reserve looks at it much differently because quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4 failed to produce the inflationary scenario that they were looking for. It was a major problem for them. And this is something that we've discussed many times on this channel. And in fact, if you go and you read Monetary Policy Strategies for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World, John Williams, Fed president of the New York Fed, said it just like that. The problem that we need to solve these days is the risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high. This speech was given November 30th of 2018. Right? Prior to all the COVID experiences and inflationary experiences and supply chain breakdowns and money printer and all the other stuff that goes along with it. They knew back then that they had a problem that money printing doesn't necessarily cause the inflationary scenario that a lot of people would be 100% sure of, because it didn't work back then. So now it's something interesting that is now looked at as far as what creates the inflationary scenario that the Fed is looking for. And now, typically, when you drop interest rates, this would spark the consumer, right? And it does spark the consumer. You lower interest rates, people are going to go out there and buy houses and cars and go on vacation and do all the stuff with those lower interest rates, taking advantage of them to then, enjoy themselves, enjoy their lives. And so when the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates, this would, in your mind, in my mind, and pretty much every economist out there is in their mind would say, lower interest rates stimulate the economy. Now, this all works until you hit the lower bound of zero. And now all of a sudden, when you have low interest rates and you're close to the lower bound of zero, all of a sudden, dropping of interest rates is no longer the stimulative tool that it once was. And in fact, it's so broken that the idea behind it just doesn't even function. Now, the idea behind it functions, but the Fed knows within their own monetary policy tools that the adjustment of interest rates doesn't work, right? They know this. Nobody else knows it. And this is one of the most confusing things that goes on with it, because this is part of the monetary policy. But when it comes to lowering interest rates, this would typically spark business investment. Not necessarily the consumer. Yes, it does get the consumer to go out there and buy houses and cars and go on vacation. But what it's really doing is it's sparking business investment. Now, if you can spark business investment, those people are going to start expanding their operations, buildings, equipment, hiring people, right? So when they start hiring people, now you got employment going on. More people are working. When you have more people working, you have more people consuming. When you have more people consuming, you'll have supply-demand imbalances. Supply-demand imbalances take place, you get price adjustments. And this is really how the Federal Reserve operates when it comes to the adjustment of monetary policy for the inflation or deflationary scenarios that they are looking for. If they can mess with the employment, then they can mess eventually with the consumer, which is going to mess with the price inflations. And now, a lot of times, they want to skip that step, right? This employment step of things. And just say, no, they raise prices or they raise interest rates or lower interest rates, and that directly affects the consumer. In a roundabout way, it does, yeah. Right? Through the employment part of things. And you have to understand how that part works. Because if you don't see it that way, or you don't understand that that's what's taken place prior to current conditions, you would see that they would mess with the interest rates and it would mess with the unemployment or the employment, right? The jobs. Well, basically since the end of the Obama administration, since hitting the lower bound of zero, since all the quantitative easing all throughout the Trump administration, even during the Biden administration, we've had historically low unemployment, right? Yeah, it does rise, but it's not risen to levels that I remember as being a kid. There was serious numbers back in the day, comparatively to what they are now. So unemployment doesn't rise. Now, yes, true, and I'll admit, right, they mess with the numbers. They don't give us the real numbers. The real unemployment numbers are probably much higher and all the other stuff. I get it. I don't disagree with that at all. I believe that to be the case, right? They mess with those numbers. However, it's not us who are in charge of monetary policy, right? If we were in charge of monetary policy, then we could say, hey, you're messing with the numbers. That doesn't mean anything, right? But we're not the ones who are in charge of monetary policy. If we were, we could say that, but we're not. The people who are in charge of monetary policy do look at those numbers. And regardless if they're fake or not, and they're pulling the wool over our eyes, doesn't matter if we're trying to figure out what it is that they are going to do with the monetary policy. We can say it should be this or it should be that. What difference does it make? We're not going to be the ones voting, right? They're the ones voting. And if we want to know what they're going to vote like, we have to know what it is that they're looking at and what it is that they think is the right numbers, right? Because that's the important part about this, because understanding how it is that the unemployment has stayed historically low even through all the interest rates adjustments that have taken place. The unemployment has stayed historically low. And not only was it historically low, even during November of 2018, when the speech was given, it was a problem creating inflation. You see what's happened here? Like the Federal Reserve lost it. They lost it. Like they lost control of monetary policy, and nobody is quite realizing it. They almost admit that. Saying it, like if they had taken a balance sheet of of $850 billion to $4.5 trillion during the quantitative easing of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and failed to produce the inflationary scenario, and that they actually had a problem that they needed to solve, and that was that the risk of inflation was going to be persistently too low rather than too high. And that's the reason that it was the problem, is that the lower bound of zero gave them very little room to lower interest rates enough to actually stimulate the economy. They could hit that lower bound of zero, but it wouldn't create the inflationary scenario that everybody would have anticipated. And now understanding why this took place, like why is it that they could get to zero but not really stimulate the economy? You have all this employment, but it still doesn't stimulate the economy. And there has to be a reason for this, and that's because there's something called the neutral interest rate. Very much what was talked about inside of this speech. And now understanding that there is a neutral interest rate, and that nobody knows exactly where this neutral interest rate is. But if the neutral interest rate is very close to zero, monetary policy doesn't work. It simply does not work. The idea that people have out there believes that it works. But if you took interest rates to zero, and the neutral interest rate, which is the rate that is neither accommodating nor restricting the economy, is also close to zero, you cannot drop interest rates far enough below that neutral interest rate in order to stimulate the economy. It just doesn't work. And this is one of the reasons why we could see all the things out there like houses and bonds and stock market and everything else go up in price because of the easy money policies that were existing out there. But we didn't find the inflationary scenario that the Federal Reserve was looking for, because they could not get the interest rates far enough below neutral in order to do that. See, this is the understanding of it. This is why things are about to get worse. Right? Here's the reason why things are about to get worse. How many people we got here? 600 people. Nice, man. Thank you for joining in on this live stream. Hit that like button. We got 600 people watching. We should have 250 likes right now. 300 likes. All right, so this is why things are about to get worse. Because think about the unemployment right now. Right? Unemployment is really low. Okay? And we have an inflationary scenario that is staying persistent. Think about that. Interest rates have risen, unemployment has stayed low, and inflation is staying persistent. That means that the interest rate setting policy is not creating the unemployment scenario that the Federal Reserve would typically be looking for to adjust inflation. Right? If you can mess with the unemployment, you will mess with the consumer, and the consumer will then start to back away, creating the supply-demand imbalances or rebalancing, or however you want to look at it, which would then start bringing the price inflation down. But we don't have that situation taking place because the unemployment is staying historically low. Why? Right? Why is the unemployment staying historically low? Because of the situation that was put into place prior to coming into the recessionary pressures that should be taking place right now, because of the pre-bailing out of these corporations. See, I mean, how many times did I say it, that, people were going to lose their jobs at these corporations and they were going to end up going to work at the service industry? Well, this is what's happening right now. And so I just think about it like for myself, like, how is it that if I had an income that was elevated up to here, it drops down to here, my debt payments are going up, my standard of living is going up, or my standard of living, my cost of living is going up? And this is the reason why. So you didn't lose your job, the unemployment doesn't rise. But the amount of income that you're getting doesn't increase, it's actually decreasing. And now you have interest payments on a debt that is now too high. And you can't make the payments on it anymore. So nobody's going to lose their job. That's the problem with this. See, the Federal Reserve is looking for that moment, right, where unemployment begins to rise, because they're mandated to do two things: low and stable prices and full employment. So think about that. If they have full employment going out, like if unemployment stays low, then their only mandate after that is the low and stable prices. And if the low and stable prices is the issue that they're attempting to fix, well, the problem that they needed to resolve back in the day was inflation expectation that were persistently too low rather than too high. So well, now that means they need to have an inflation scenario that is too high rather than too low in order to solve the monetary policies. You see how this ended up falling into place? And the reason why it's going to get worse is because the interest rates aren't going to come down. Not so long as the unemployment stays low. And if the unemployment stays low and the interest rates stay elevated like they are, then the income that people are going to receive from that at the lower end working class is going to diminish. Their income might stay the same, but their standard of living is going to diminish as the cost of living goes up. And now on the exact flip side of this, the rich, the wealthy, see, they're getting a return on capital investment. As long as elevated interest rates are within the economy, well, then their capital investment now has a higher return to it. They get to spend that money back into the economy again. They wonder why it is that there's this separation between the rich and the poor. You think about that, right? How it is that this high interest rate puts a burden on the working class. How the day-to-day, paycheck to paycheck living class now is burdened with the higher interest rates, the higher cost of living, the less income, more money going towards paying the debt off, and at the same time, those higher interest rates is now funneling money to those who have invested their capital, getting a return on that capital investment, returning that money back into the economy, and spending that money, keeping the inflation elevated. This is really how it's going down. See, people wonder what it is that they can do. You can't do anything. Like, this is something that is going to continue. It's going to get worse. Right? That separation between the rich and the poor, it's obvious, right? You see it happening now? Anytime there's new money that pours into the system, that's exactly what you're going to find. You're going to find a continuation of the separation between the rich and the poor because of the Cantillon effect. Like, recognizing the Cantillon effect, it's just so easy. Those who have access to the new money, right? You think about it, that return on capital investment, that's new money coming in. People who borrow money, that's new money coming in. The people who are actually using that and not being burdened by it, like the people who are using credit cards or maybe have a car loan that they can't shake, right? Those are the people who are burdened by it. There's good debt and bad debt. And the bad debt is driving the lower class even lower, and the good debt is driving the higher class even higher. And it's all done with the higher interest rates. All right, 18 minutes into this, we got 822 people watching. My goodness, look at all these people who have joined in on this live stream. 203 likes. I would love to see it up to 400 likes right now. We got 800 people watching. Go hit that like button. The comments are flying through. I can't even keep up on this. It's just so many of them here. Let me just back up a little bit. No, you're wrong again. Here we go. I love it when I'm wrong. All right. The unemployment will rise. Please come back in 3 months and eat your crow. I'm not saying it won't rise. Bro, who is this? Scott. I'm not saying it won't rise. I'm saying it's not risen. It didn't rise in the past. There is no time in which that we've had a significantly rising unemployment except for the pandemic, which was self-inflicted, right? That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying it ain't rising. I'm saying that the Federal Reserve is looking for unemployment to rise before they adjust the interest rates. That's what I'm trying to tell people. But at this exact moment, from all the efforts that they are doing to try and create a situation in which that unemployment would rise, hasn't yet. People told me 2 years ago, just wait, it's going to happen. I know, I was waiting. I was one of them. I'm saying, wait until unemployment rises. But here's the problem. All the people who had good, high-paying jobs at a zombie corporation and couldn't all the people who were missing from the service industry are losing their job at the high zombie corporation and finding a job over at the service industry. You're wondering why unemployment isn't rising? That's the reason right there. Give it some time, and eventually those jobs will all be occupied, and the people who are getting laid off or losing their jobs from the companies that are failing are going to go on unemployment. Once that begins to happen, it will put the burden on the consumer, and the inflation will come down, and the Federal Reserve will move. I'm not trying to say it's not going to happen. Don't try and tell me that I'm like saying that it will never happen. I mean, there was people telling me that interest rates were never going to rise. I laughed at that one. I was like, yeah, just wouldn't hold your breath on that one, right? Okay, here we go. Moving on to a better comment. The government can print its own currency as the Constitution states. Actually, the Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution says no state shall coin anything but gold and silver as a legal tender and payment of debt. All right? The government can't print its own money. It's not even that. It's unconstitutional. Now, if Congress comes in and says, okay, we're going to vote for this whole thing to come in and give it a charter of 100 years, it'll be temporary and blah, 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 and then eventually make it permanent. Well, okay, fine. So we have unconstitutional money that nobody argues and chooses to voluntarily use. You do realize that we choose to use the dollar. We choose to sign up to pay taxes with the dollar. We do not have to use it. In fact, a store doesn't even have to accept it. You realize that, right? A store does not have to accept money from you, not the dollar. They can accept anything they want. Now, they do have to pay taxes in dollars, and they do have to accept whatever it is that they are getting as if they are dollars and pay taxes on it. And so there's all these kind of legalities to it. But there's no law in the world that says that I am forced, or anybody else out there is forced to use a Federal Reserve note. You are forced to pay taxes in it, and you have voluntarily did that. So everything that we are experiencing is voluntarily done, including the use of our money. Okay? All right, Jesus loves you, the government does not. I believe that. All right, transitory, flattening the curve. Yeah. There is definitely commercial work going on out there. I understand it's less because of all the remote work that started, but that should still be jobs for most of us. There's, it's something that I think a lot of times when I come out and I talk a lot of stuff, people have a tendency to hear me say something like manufacturing jobs are not coming back to the United States. They hear that and they think I'm saying that there is no manufacturing jobs in the United States. That is not the same statement. Right? That's not the same statement. There is lots of manufacturing. There's new manufacturing. There's plenty of manufacturing happening. Well, I shouldn't say plenty. There's lots of manufacturing happening in the United States. The United States is a major manufacturer of stuff. In fact, they're a huge contributor to a lot of stuff that people use around the world, a lot of agricultural products, all that stuff. What I'm trying to say here, we do not manufacture enough, right, to make up for the amount that we import. We import far more than we export, right? And that's actually part of Triffin's dilemma, but that's another thing. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, you can bring manufacturing back, but it isn't going to come back in a significant amount to actually reverse the trade deficits. That's where I'm kind of getting at. The trade deficits have to be in place in order for the United States to export money to the rest of the world. Now, this wasn't a plan, right? Now, it could have been a plan for some people. There were some people out there who probably recognized the situation. There was other people out there who might have massaged the situation to occur a little bit more. And there's a lot of people out there who took advantage of it. But now the situation in which that the dollar became the world reserve currency was not one of force, but of one that the world was accepting of it. They were like, yes, please give us dollars to do transactions with. And the rest of the world just did. Like, the United States was like, yeah, like, we got all the gold anyway, so yeah, here, you want to use dollars, go for it. And they used a lot of them, and everybody loved it because they were able to do all these transactions with it. The only problem that we were facing is, how do you export these dollars to the world? Like, if you're exporting stuff, they're sending you gold, but they're going to want their gold back. You don't want to give it back. Well, I tell you what, I'll buy your stuff and I'll give you dollars, right? And I'll just buy your stuff, but I'm going to give you dollars, not gold back. People were like, okay, well, dollars are great for transactions. Great. Well, we won't be manufacturing as much stuff since we're going to be exporting dollars and getting your stuff, and we don't really even have to produce anything to get the dollars in the first place. Now, who's this working out for? You see what's happened here? Wow, we're at 900 people. This is amazing. Go hit the like button, everybody. We're almost there. 290 people right now. All right, we're too far gone for any human to save us. I kind of believe that. Who was that? Julio? What was his name? Yeah, Julio. I kind of believe that. And it's not saying that it's so far gone that there's nothing you can do about it. I just think that trying to create a situation in which that we would have a government entity that would come in and make it like all great and grand for everybody, I think that's a far off concept that ain't gonna work. You as an individual, I think, has huge opportunities and possibilities and all kinds of stuff that you can do right now that doesn't leave you in despair, right? Doesn't leave you in like this in a world of tragedy or something like that. There's plenty of places that you could take advantage of right now. And like, I mean, just think about all the online things you can do. Like, it starts small. That's the hardest part, is that most people are like, man, I don't want to work that hard for $1. Well, it's like, you're going to have to work pretty hard to get the first dollar. But then the second dollar isn't coming as hard. And then when you start making $10 or $100 or $1,000, it becomes a lot easier. But the hardest dollars to make is the first ones, because it takes so much damn work to try and get there, right? I don't understand. If the Fed has high rates, that should be bearish on inflation. So why would they keep rates restrictive if they want inflation moderately above 2%? So again, like, if you think about, if you give it time, and this is something that, we have talked about a lot of times on this channel, and it's difficult a lot of times to understand this because we always look so like, I'm not trying to say one-sided, but maybe short-sighted in the ideas of what interest rates does to the economy once it finds its way into the broader economy. Like, people look at the adjustment of interest rates as the like the main tool. That has an immediate and direct impact on the markets, right? But the decisions that we make, the businesses that we start, the investments that we do, the places that we go with our money, the savings and all that other stuff, that comes down the road, right? So it takes time for these interest rates to work into that part of the economy, the broader economy, right? 6 months to a year, 18 months down the road, these interest rates finally start to impact the economy. So it's really important to understand that the adjustment of interest rates is a psychological tool, right? Now, let's think about what really higher interest rates does for an economy. Right? So and I've used this analogy before. When you lower interest rates, you immediately have this impact, right? People are like, oh, low interest rates. I can get a house loan for this much on this particular house, right? Give it time, the house price moves up. Then it won't be able to afford it anymore. But that initial moment, that short term, right, when the dropping of interest rates sparks that consumer, they get out there. That's easy to understand. That part, no problem. The harder part to understand is the elevated interest rate and what happens to capital investment, because it takes time before this starts to work through. Now, if you can imagine, back in the early 80s, a U.S. Treasury would have like, a 10-year would have like something like 15%, right? 15% yield on it. And I don't know exactly what it was. It was somewhere around there. Even if it wasn't, we're just going to imagine it was, right? It was a higher interest rate. So you inherit $1 million from your rich uncle, and you invest it with the U.S. government by buying their debt, buying the bonds, buying the sovereign assets of the United States, right? Those U.S. treasuries. And with that, you're getting a return of, like, with your $1 million investment, of like $150,000 a year, right? That's pretty damn good, right? $150,000 a year in the early 80s meant you were going on vacation, you were buying houses, you were buying cars, you were stimulating the economy, right? So you think about it, buying houses, cars, going on vacation, with the return on the interest rate. Not off of the lowering of interest rates sparking your idea of being able to make the payment, but this is a return on capital investment that is now stimulating the economy. Same thing is now starting to happen. The only problem is that the separation between the classes of who has a return on capital investment and who has to deal with the higher interest rates. So now this is a problem for the lower class, because we had a middle class that was much more narrowly gapped, right? In order to get to that higher level, it didn't take as much work to get into the middle class. Now, if you're starting way below, in order to get to that middle class takes so much more effort. That's why there's this separation taking place. The ever higher increasing interest rates burdens the lower class as they cannot, continue to sustain their standard of living. Their incomes are dropping, from layoffs and having to take a service industry job. At the same time, the higher interest rates are returning capital to the wealthy, who are then moving that back into the economy, taking advantage of it. And that's actually something we had actually predicted on this channel. Now, I don't know if I said it in so many words like that, but we kind of had something similar to that. Holy moly, we're over 1,000 viewers right now. Nice, right on. Hey, 1,000 people watching right now. We should have that like button. Well, we got it up to 361. We should have it up at 500. Go hit that like button. We'll have it up at 500 in no time at all. Let's go check out this super chat I just got. $5 from Jake Northwest. Thank you so much for the $5. I can't watch as much because of the longer videos. Can you occasionally make a short video after summing up what was discussed in your live stream? Yeah, Jake, that's kind of one of the things that I try to gear onto these live streams, is to take the first initial 10 to 15 minutes to really blast out all the stuff and the information that I really wanted to talk about. So really, if you watch the first 10 or 15 minutes of my videos or of the live streams, you're really going to get the bulk of the information. After that, it's the conversation that we're having. Sometimes it might be related to the video, to the topic of the video. Sometimes somebody might, throw me off on a tangent on something else. And that's just like the uniqueness of doing the live streams and where they go. So my intent for the video and the information is within the first 10 or 15 minutes. So anything else that comes after that is really just, it's, freestyling, freestyling the questions in. All right. At zero rates, debt peaks. High debt repayment risk demands higher compensation for risk. Higher debt repayment risk demands. Yeah. If you now take out variable debt, you risk the higher servicing costs, making you insolvent, bankruptcy. Yeah. Hey, Simon, this is Mr. Horology. Do you believe Americans are on a home equity high? I see a lot of people taking equity loans and buying luxury goods. Will that affect the housing market eventually? Yes, I do believe that. Now, I mean, are they buying? And I do understand that there's a lot of people out there who do take out the equity in their home and go buy luxurious items with it. Now, I am curious, though, is that the case today? Like, are people taking out the equity loan, which is going to be a high interest rate considering, where interest rates are right now? And are they buying luxury items with that? I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I think that was a very prevalent thing within the economy. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why we are having a slowdown in the economy, is people are not taking as much advantage of that. Now, do people feel like, is there a wealth effect that comes from the elevated house prices? Now, regardless if you even take the equity loan or take the money from it, just the overall feeling that you have of comfort considering the value of your house and where it may be positioned. Like, if you have a house that goes underwater, you're going to feel internally, you're going to feel a burden, right? Oh no, I cannot get out of my house. I can't sell it. I pay more for it than I should. All this other stuff, like these stressful things, will start to impact your thoughts, right? And you'll be like very like stingy with your money, thinking, man, I can't afford it because I'm living in a house that I can't afford, right? And so you'll have this overall feeling of it. But then if you get into a house and then 2 years later it's worth $150,000 more than what you paid for it, well, then you're not concerned about that. You're thinking, man, no, I got all this money. I could sell my house today and then go travel around for a while, or I could, buy another house, or I can have all this, like, I'm not tied down, or I'm not burdened, or I'm not under, that feeling of being underwater or something like that. When that happens, well, then you feel a little bit more comfortable spending the money you do have. Like, even if you're not taking out the equity part of things, right? Taking out the home equity loan part. You're just feeling better about the money you do have, and you would spend that into the economy. It's the wealth effect, right? So could that be playing into it? Sure, I'm sure that could have a lot to do with it. But I don't think there was as much people like borrowing that higher. They could be, I mean. But probably not, because you can see like even car sales and like the higher priced luxury items like that, those things are starting to really fall off on favor right now. And I would assume that's probably the reason. Everybody's getting a little worried. And then even still, if the prices are starting to fall, then generally people who have money are fairly smart with money. And they're probably seeing the prices fall, thinking, okay, deflationary scenario, maybe we'll have better prices in a couple of months, get into the summer before I buy the car. Let's see here. In a liquidity crisis, with the Fed buy corporate debt to repeat the unemployment rate low. Well, I think the Fed wouldn't be able to buy corporate debt unless it was an unusual and exigent circumstances that then, in conjunction with Congress, could possibly set up something like a special purpose vehicle and then go into the buying of corporate debt. But no, like right now, the way the Federal Reserve is chartered, they can't go into buying corporate debt. That's not within the realms of assets that they can. What is it? The composition of assets that they can put on their menu. I don't know. I can't remember exactly how they phrase it, but it's something of that nature. But I mean, I guess if it was a bad enough liquidity crisis, then yes, they could set up a special purpose vehicle for the unusual and exigent circumstance, and then put out the credible threat to buy corporate debt. And if nobody bought it, they would actually buy it. So yeah, I guess there is that possibility. But again, they would only really need to do that in order to keep unemployment from rising significantly. And they're actually looking for unemployment to rise at some point, right? To bring the inflationary scenario down. Like, even though they do have this appropriate monetary policy to be positioned with inflation moderately above 2% for some time, like I know a lot of people don't realize that, but they don't have a 2% target. They actually have a monetary policy that has them with an inflation set moderately above 2%. Now, even though they do have that set moderately above 2%, there is going to come a time in which that they do want it to come down to maybe even less than 2, right? Because they're going for this flexible average inflation targeting. They may be attempting to target either 1% inflation or 3% inflation from now on, never targeting 2%, but over the long run, 2% over time, right? You see? So at some point, there is going to be an issue in which that the Federal Reserve does want inflation to go below 2%, right, in order to maintain the flexible average inflation targeting. And in that case, they will need unemployment to rise. And so if there is a case in which that unemployment started to rise, it would most likely be in the Fed's favor to achieve the flexible average inflation targeting, which may mean that we have historically high, or not maybe not historically high unemployment, but fairly high unemployment for a longer time than what would be considered normal. All right. Like the Federal Reserve would have high unemployment within the economy, they would adjust interest rates to deal with that. But if they're sitting in a situation in which that they have a flexible average inflation targeting, and they are actually attempting to try and achieve like a lower inflation for a significant amount of time to make up for all the higher inflation that we have just experienced, then we may find where unemployment stays elevated for a significant amount of time, and people will be like, man, the Federal Reserve is causing all this undue needed damage to the economy, but they're trying to make up for all the elevated inflation with lower inflation going into the future. It's going to be so much different. Like the whole concept of what it is that the Federal Reserve uses for their strategy is going to be so different for the next 10, even 20 years until they actually transition into a full-on digital, that people are not going to be able to recognize what it is that they're doing. Right? And that's the important part about understanding the credible threat theory of it. That's the important part of listening to the communications of what they are trying to communicate, not what they're going to do, but just what they're trying to communicate out there to the people, and know that that propaganda that they are putting out there is the monetary policy, right? When they had everybody convinced at the end of the year that there was going to be interest rate cuts coming, that the dot plot had 7 interest rates coming, how many people were convinced that was going to take place? How many people started positioning themselves for those rate cuts? How many economists did you hear out there giving all their reasonings and expectations and beliefs that there was going to be this rate cut that never occurred and still hasn't? And yes, there's promises of it happening in September and all this other stuff, and these economists still believe there's going to be rate cuts or 3 rate cuts. There's some that think that there's going to be rate increases. Nobody knows. You know why? It's because interest rate cuts aren't really the Fed's policy. The speaking of it is. And you can see it totally working. Once you see it that way, once you look at it that way, you can see it. You know, you can see it clear as day. All righty. Every real estate agent was confident that there was rate cuts coming. I won some bets with them. Good for you. Good for you, Samuel. Millionaires bets it. All right. Mercer, this just a circus. All right. Let's cruise down here a little bit. All right. Savage Lee, I love silver and guns. Yeah, who doesn't, man? All right. Rate cuts for declared fiat. As my wife and I approach retirement, wishing we had purchased out there versus closer to Tampa proper. Worried about commute times back then, though. Yeah. I have nothing to do with taxed fiat. Good for you. China? What about China? The economy churned me. Oh, come on, man. All right. DoorDash delivery. Okay, end of days. Let's see. Bitcoin only works until AI becomes self-aware. Oh, yeah, that's already happening. AI apocalypse, it be. How many souls trapped in the internet? Some of you possibly. Huh. My cat's breath smells like cat food. Okay. All right. I missed the first 40 minutes in a sentence. How worse will things get? Well, I don't know. Things will just get worse from here. Like, how worse will it get? That's only depending on what your economy looks like, by the way, right? I mean, is your economy going to get worse because of the situation that you were in? That's really what it comes down to. It's going to get worse because what's going to end up happening is that even though we have elevated interest rates, the unemployment or the employment part of things at the lower class, on the lower working class citizens, is going to create a situation in which that their standard of living is going to stand still while the upper class continues to move up. That's the worst. That's how it's going to be worse for everybody on a general speaking basis, right? Because everybody wants to know how it's going to, like, generally speaking, how does that happen, right? Is that the standard of living that we have, the one that we're living, is going to be harder to maintain and get, where the standard of living and the separation between the rich and the poor is going to grow from it. That's how it's going to get worse overall. People in debt are definitely going to have a worse future. I agree. Anyone with cash will love higher interest rates. Absolutely. And that's the burden of it all, is that if they continue to be in this situation, right, where they have a burden of debt and they have a difficult time increasing their income, right? If you have a harder time trying to figure out where you're going to get a raise, a better job, more business, whatever it is that's going on, because you have a slower economy, or somewhat a slower economy, because all the rest of the working class is sitting in the same debt burden as you are, then that's going to make it very difficult, to try and work your way out of, right? Now, on the flip side of that, the same thing that they're trying to do to bring the payments down, or not the payments, but the cost of living, the standard, the price of everything, the inflation, right, to bring that standard of living back in line, the very thing that they're using is a higher interest rate, right, which is really the only tool that they would have in order to slow the economy down. The only problem with this higher interest rate is that the people at the very top are getting a return on the capital investment. They separate themselves even further away. This is always going to happen, by the way, no matter what you do. So long as new money comes into the system, and as long as you have that situation of new money coming into the system, you will always have a continual separation between the rich and the poor. There is nothing that can be done about that, right? And then even worse from that, the longer it goes on, the harder it gets for the lower class, the working class, to move their way up into it, right? It's not impossible. It just becomes ever increasingly more difficult. And you can see it because, like, just take it back a few generations. Take it back to when, somebody could go and get a factory job and actually use that factory job to buy a house. And this was not an uncommon story. A lot of people talked about that. There was times when somebody could have a 9-to-5 job, stop by the lumberyard on their way home or on their way to a piece of property that they bought, and piece a house together over the course of a summer. Like, there's people who try to do that, but it's not really taking place. Right? Things have changed dramatically, and this is what's separating the rich from the poor. And it's just, you have to understand that it's that new money that comes in that does it. And so long as you have new money coming in, it will always do it. Now, we could go into like an MMT sort of thing where they inject money right at the bottom and tax the people at the top and try and do this, manipulation of the economy to try and create a situation in which that the natural economic forces at play are then blinded to the economy, and then we function within this massive control by the government. But I assure you, those economic forces are still at play. I mean, they're still in the background working their thing. And if you don't believe it, just look at tariffs and subsidies that are going on for manufacturing here in the United States. If there wasn't any situation taking place in which that the domestic manufacturers are leaving and the foreign production is moving in, there wouldn't be a need for subsidies and tariffs. The economic forces that are at play are forcing the government to do that, unless they want to see the inevitable collapse, which will still eventually happen. It's just a matter of time before, the dollar fails to be the world reserve currency, and then it's all over. Now, could they switch it into digital currencies and negative interest rates and carry the system on for a long time? Sure. Like, that could happen, but it's not happening right now. The steps seem to be lining up for it, but it's not yet here, right? What we have right now is the situation that we have at play, and this is exactly the idea that you should be looking at. There is the possibilities of what could be, the what ifs. You could put the what ifs out there for all day long. But just knowing that, nope, there's new money coming in, right? The higher interest rates gives the capital investment a bigger return, puts a bigger burden on the working class. It's separating the rich from the poor. Like, that's not going to change. Nice. We're up to 500 people. That is so cool. Hey, we got another super chat here. I didn't even see that. All right. Steve, thank you so much for the $10. Exactly. The odds of everyone practicing the austerity to reverse the effect is basically zero, but you can reverse the effect in your personal economy with austerity and better position yourself. Absolutely, Steve. Thank you so much. That is exactly right. That is the message that I have been trying to get across to the people for so long, is that that's the way you should look at it. So many people want a political change, they want an environmental change, they want a social change, they want all these changes to occur on the exterior, never once ever thinking about it for themselves to say, no, I need to take a look at the situation for as crappy as it is and best position myself for it, and not have any expectations of what somebody else needs to do or should do or could do to make it better for me. I just need to know what the situation is so I can do better for me. And a lot of times it may be that austerity measure, saying, crap, I can't eat ribeyes, right? I have to eat peanut butter and honey for a while, even though I'm making good income, because my income may get cut short. And if my income get cut short, I sure as hell don't want that debt. And if I have debt, I shouldn't be buying ribeyes, right? Like, this is the attitude that people should have. But most people say, I deserve a ribeye. And everybody has debt. And I deserve this. And this is the problems that we have, is because that's the move into luxuries, right? Literally, even the ability to carry a debt is a luxury. Like, you think about it, like, is that something that is available to everybody throughout history? Was the access to debt? Like, of course not. You go back into the Roman times, there was debt issued, there was debt offered, and man, you better have paid it, or else, right? You suffer the consequences from it. Here, people don't pay the debt. They're like, oh, well, they don't care, right? No, not the same. Right? All right, the change is already here. The GOP and the Democrats giving it all to the corporations and ultra wealthy. But yes, individual finances is a step one, but have to vote for workers' right politicians. Well, what was that? Dutch Ham's Rock. Oh, I'm sorry, man. I mean, no, because that's putting an expectation on the exterior that you could actually vote a politician in who could actually save your economy or your way of life or something of that nature. I don't put that kind of expectations on them. I mean, it would be great if they did, and it would be great to vote for people who would move in that direction. But my level of expectation of that happening and happening in a way that is actually going to benefit me is very low, like almost non-existent. You know, in fact, I'm pretty sure it's just not going to happen. So instead of wanting or looking for or anticipating or hoping for anything like a politician who's going to come in and create a situation that's going to be better for me, I'm going to force that better situation upon myself just from the situation, just from the opportunities and things that I have in my life within reach. Right? That's what I'm going to do, because if you look at it any other way, then you're going to be really wishful thinking for a long time. There's nobody out there. There's nobody out there who can do it, right? There's nobody coming at all. So it's just easier to accept it for that, and then be like, yeah, I mean, I'll vote for the best guy that I think is there, and then have very little expectations that he's actually going to do it, because most politicians don't, right? I mean, they don't have your best, they don't have the best intentions for your life, right? Like, that's not it. They have the best intentions for re-election, however they can get that done. The initial, I shouldn't say that. When a politician first gets in, I think that there are some who really do have a belief that they want to do something that's good and great for the world, right? I think that's probably the case. The longer that they're in that position, the more disillusioned that they become, and the more that they just want to hold on to their job and get reelected. And I believe that is probably the majority of our government is conducting themselves in that way. If I truly believe that they had my best intentions, like the things for me, my constitutional rights, my freedoms, you know, that sort of thing. If I had a belief that they were like really focused in on that first, then I would have a different belief about them. But they don't. So I'm not going to put that kind of faith and belief into them to have that kind of control over my life. F them, right? All right, moving on. That's how masses continue to be controlled, always thinking one party or the other will save them, and they polarize against each other. That's right. Their energy fights themselves instead of fighting the power. And it allows those two political powers to then throw particular ideas and changes that they want, fight it out amongst each other, and then pass them and get them to go along saying, hey, we tried, right? Both ways. No matter how you look, like, I think Obamacare was probably the biggest indicator of that situation. Republicans talked about how it was going to absolutely destroy this nation, right? And yet, the moment that it passed, it turned from abolish, how did they call it? Repeal and replace. Repeal and replace. Now, it wasn't just repeal. That's what it should have been. It was repeal and replace almost immediately after that. So now that we have it, now we don't want to get rid of it. Like, we like it too now, right? See, that's what drives me nuts about this. Is like, you guys fought so tooth and nail over this thing, but you got it passed. Now that you got it, look at this new thing that we got, right? And it's just like, it irritates me because that's how they do it. They fight each other on the forefront, but they're patting each other on the back. They're like, dude, good job, man. You guys are just, you're saying it right. And then everybody out here in the audience, like all the spectators, they're like, they're picking their favorite sides and teams and players and all this other stuff, and then accusing the other fans of being idiots and morons. Meanwhile, they're getting played. total pawns in this game of left-right paradigm. Like, dive into it. Just research hardcore. Dive into some of the New World Order propaganda, stuff that's out there, man. You will see it. You can totally see how this country was hijacked years ago. Straight up. Like, straight up. It's one of the reasons why I look at, like, the whole idea of sovereign citizen as a great thing that everybody should know and understand. And if we truly understood it for what it is, and that the real powers and authority that we have, right? Because there's no higher authority in this country other than us as an individual. We stand above the government. Right? People don't realize this. And if they did realize it and they conducted themselves in a way that was more in line with the Constitution and their constitutional rights, we could literally make a lot of these politicians just not only cower to the power of the people, not only cower to them, we could hold them under scrutiny, but then we could also make government irrelevant in our life. Nobody knows this. Nobody knows this. And that's why they're like, oh, you got to vote for the right person. It was just like, oh, really? Do you have anybody in line who's going to talk like I just talked? Anybody, even remotely close? I don't think so. Right? And so you might have somebody out there who might mention a little brief glimmer of it, but every single one of them wants the system to continue the way it is, regardless of how ugly they say it is. They do want it. They don't want what I just said, right? To have a true constitutional freedom-loving people who hold the government truly under their thumb, who live like a sovereign citizen, who says, no, man, I understand my freedoms. I understand my constitutional rights. I understand that you're not going to be able to do a lot of these things that you are doing because understanding the Constitution just simply says I'm not going to conduct myself this way. They don't do it. Right? They simply just don't do it. And neither does Trump. Trump 2024 does not solve that problem at all. Right? I guarantee you he will not solve that problem. He will continue to operate within the system the way that the system is operating today, no matter how much he says he's working against it. That's wrong. It is lying. Straight up. He had his chance. He had his chance. He didn't do it. Well, you remember what Trump said? The Fed should be printing money and going into negative interest rates. Straight up, as president, said the Jerome Powell should be fired, the Fed should be printing money, and they should take interest rates in the negative territory because there's no inflation. This is what Donald Trump was saying at the end of his administration. I do not trust this dude. He is very much in line with the Federal Reserve in conducting monetary policy. That whole little bitch fit that he was throwing about Jerome Powell needing to be fired gave the Federal Reserve all the power that they needed. It was the inflation expectation that he had taken down to nothing that gave the real interest rates to the Federal Reserve. It was exactly what they were looking for at the time. Like that was such an effort that worked in cahoots, and nobody saw that happening. Right? I won't let that go. I will not let that go. Nobody talks about it. Nobody brings it up. I won't let it go. I'm like, no, that was a big old propaganda ploy that you all did together. Okay. You don't believe? Here, I'll tell you. It's actually stated in this speech right here, exactly that. Here we go. Okay. The downward shift in inflation expectation has a second round effect on real interest rates, the economy, and inflation. When policy is constrained by the effective lower bound, the downward shift in inflation expectation raises the real interest rates. Right? That's what Donald Trump was trying to do at the time. And this is what, nobody saw it. And I mean, at the time I'm looking at it, I'm like, wait a minute, did he just say what I think he said? Did he just say that we should be printing money and going to negative rates? Is he really honestly saying this? And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would he do that, right? And then I got to thinking about it, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. If you say there's no inflation, you put it out there, you put this accusatory propaganda information out there to the world, and they would actually believe it, that there's no inflation. and that the Fed should be printing money, and that they should take interest rates into negative territory because there's no inflation. And what does that really do? It raises the real interest rates. So I don't trust it. I just don't. That's, I mean, can't, I mean, it was just like, I mean, if you can hold frame, right? And it was just like, you said that you wanted to do all these things, like as a candidate, I was just like, I trust those things. You didn't do any of the stuff that I was looking for, right? You come out and say all these things about, like, the Fed should be printing money and stuff like that. I don't forget them, right? Like, I don't forget. Like, I mean, there might be all kinds of wonderful things that, he did do or whatever. Hey, that's great. I mean, there's wonderful things that everybody does. But there's some things that he said that I just am not accepting of. And that's one of them, right? And knowing that it was a total ploy. All right, 977 people watching. Man, you guys are really digging this live stream. We're an hour into it, 586 likes. Thank you for getting it up to that 500 mark. With close to 1,000, let's see if we can get it to 700. 700 likes. All right, I'll be your next president. I'll do nothing other than berate you online for not going outside and doing something cool today. Ben, if you did that, you would probably be one of the best presidents that ever existed. I would vote for you, man. If that's what you would do, is just like, tell people that they are being like losers for sitting in their house online and isn't that funny? All right. Oh, Larry, I'm not your buddy. All right. Best live stream. Thank you, Valerie. All right. Candy, it's an election. That's me based on, okay. Trump's going to finish us off. I don't know. The election is rigged. Vote Jill Stein. I don't even know who that is. All right. All right. Integrity. UE for Congress. All right. Why do all these people need a leader? Are they not adult enough to adult? Well, yeah, Candy. I mean, I think that's probably it. Most people are not. Most people probably would be just fine without any kind of leadership. But the handful of people that wouldn't be fine would screw it up for everybody else. So, yeah, essentially, because people cannot behave. Like, ultimately, I think authority would just like everybody to behave. Right? And now I'm not sure exactly what behaving is, because really that's a matter of opinion. But without it, like, what are you going to do, right? So there's going to be some people who are going to have to, be out there in order to make sure that other people don't screw with you. I mean, it's just like, I don't know how else to, like, simply put it. I think there is a lot of things that we can do to simply get government out of our lives. And one of those things that we could do is to start, like, the use of cryptocurrencies and smart contracts. Like, if we could create a smart contract system that people were very accustomed to using and chose to use it on a regular basis, we could really make a lot of, like, the legal system and government and stuff like that obsolete, like, just irrelevant. It wouldn't even matter. Like, we wouldn't even have any use for them or purpose with them at all. And I mean, to me, that is like an anarchist dream, to be able to have something set up that is a guarantee, right? Like, we got this smart contract that's going to have a conclusion at the end of this, and there's nothing that we can do to change that. It will definitely take place. And now, because of that, you don't have to go to somebody and saying, hey, we had a contract, he owes me money. Look, judge, I got this. All that is gone, right? So now, all of a sudden, we have contracts and capabilities of doing business that doesn't have any legal system or governmental oversight or anything like that going on with it. It's completely, out of that realm. Oh, man, I love that idea. Absolutely love that idea. More than just about anything out there, to have an idea that not just get government out of our lives, but literally make them irrelevant. Perfect. Go ahead, try and do what you got to do. Do what you got to do. It doesn't matter. I don't care anymore because you're irrelevant to me. Man, I would love to be in that position when it comes to government. Yeah. Videos like this help the problem We all need to get smarter. Videos like this help the problem. Help fight the problem or helping the problem grow? All right. Biden has not violated our space. What do you think about increasing small agriculture? Neo-pioneering could bring our food, housing, economy into much better action. Used to be 90% farmers, 1776. Well, here's the thing, Victory Garden. I really agree and enjoy the idea of it. Like I myself have a bit of a garden going. Damn possum ate my chickens, so I don't have any chickens anymore. They killed them off, but I took the last that I had over to a buddy's house, and saved her. But I'm gonna have birds again. But raising my own food, raising birds, raising animals, doing stuff like that. It's a great, fun hobby thing to do, right? Getting people to do it on a mass scale would take like personal decision to do it, right? You would have to go against what it is that most people do and say that it's easier just to go down to the store and buy my food, right? As opposed to growing it yourself. Could it work? Yes. It's a great idea. I personally, outside of losing my birds, are trying to do something very similar to that. But is it going to be like something that everybody is going to do on a regular basis? Not unless they're forced to do it. Right? Because the obvious decision of just going towards it wouldn't happen, because the easier decision to make is just to go down to the store and buy it. All right, Uneducated Economist. Behaving is living within your means. Yeah. All right. Do you think things for society will get worse? In return, do you think things will get better? If so. Okay, so personally, I think things are going to get much better for me, because that's the kind of view and outlook that I have on life, is that things are going to be awesome for me in the future. I don't think about the New World Order coming down on me. I don't think about government control. I don't think about all these things that are going to typically have people going, oh my God, we're going to have a horrible future in our life. I don't look at AI as a bad thing. I look at it as a good thing. I look at all that automation and everything that's coming to bring conveniences to our lives. All that stuff I look at as a positive. I see it as a great thing coming. Okay. Now, on the flip side of that, the bad things that I do see are the fact that we do have a system in which that the rich and the poor are being separated, right? And you're going to find the issues that come from that are going to be like, it's not just the separation from the rich and the poor. It's that mass move into luxuries that we are facing. It's the ability to find it's the enabling that is happening. That's another one. Like the enabling from the higher standard of living that we have that has increased here in our nation. Think about like how homeless have cell phones and food stamps and all this, or EBT cards or whatever. They have access to things that people who are really stricken in poverty would never even consider having. In fact, the only people who would have that would be people who actually had stuff in their life. It would be a sign of luxury to have a cell phone and beer, right? But here in our nation, even the homeless have cell phone and beers and access to food and stuff like that. So it goes to show the condition in which that our society is in has been one that's elevated quite extreme. And as much as people want to complain about how hard it is and how bad it is and all this other stuff, we live a really, really easy life in the United States, right, comparatively to some places in this world. So I'm real thankful for that, like super thankful. Once I recognized it from an economist point of view of things, I became super thankful that I'm here, right? Because the easy life that we live is not something that you get in other nations. So now, on that as well, when you think about like what happens when you have a society that has been enabled, well, now you have people who will begin to run amok, right? They don't think about like taking care of their citizens in the same fashion. They, are arrogant in their behavior. They don't do things in a traditional fashion, like what we would expect in a traditional fashion. They don't have the limitations in their life that would say, hey, I can't behave in this fashion, this extreme fashion like I'm doing, because the consequences from this behavior will then stricken me for the rest of my life. People who don't have that fear, right? That's not a fear of theirs anymore. So now you find people who just simply act crazy in what would, well, in our minds would be crazy. You see some of like the extreme stuff that happens within like music videos or lyrics of songs, or even just in the movies or day-to-day communications between people is very belligerent and very like obscene and not like in the realms of what you would consider wholesome, right? Well, this is because of the way this society has grown. Like if we took it back to like Victory Garden was saying, 90% of the people being like a farmer kind of attitude, that's hard work. Like you're not going to be thinking about how like the government should be like giving you more food stamps or giving free health care and stuff like that. You're not worried about any of that stuff. You're worried about your harvest. You're worried about your animals, your livestock, the conditions of your property, making sure that the people on your property are healthy and working the same thing with you. You're focused in on your own thing going on there, and that is a much stronger self-sustaining way of living life. But it doesn't work like that anymore. The conveniences, the comforts of life, and the enabling of people to not have to like suffer the consequences of not working hard are so prevalent within the society. There's no reversing. Like you can't condition people back into like being hardcore. Yeah, it just doesn't do it. You have to be raised into that stuff. All right. What's on? Still 885 people watching. This is incredible. Thank you all for being here today. All right, none of this matters. The sun is going nova and our poles are flipping. Look at these weather anomalies. Yeah, I kind of agree. All right, lightning EMP will take net and crypto down. Christ is king. Christ our king. There we go, sorry. Thank you. Sounds like Greatest Generation versus Generation Z. Does that make it easier for you when you see homeless people living in the streets? Yeah. Working hard won't have any effect in people who have their priorities screwed up. I agree. I know a hard worker. He's really ducking down to earth. I'd give my last dollar to him. He's good-hearted. All right. Whoa, Simon has been going on an hour. Yeah, I know. I'm just like cutting loose today. Well, you're all out here. We got 881 people watching, so I just can't give up. Besides, I'm on vacation right now. I didn't know if I told you guys that. I took the week off to get prepared to go to the Rebel Capitalist, but I'm not preparing. I'm just going to go down there and I'm just going to give it. Like, I'm going to take some notes down on some dates and, maybe the title of some speeches, but I'm just going to go down there and just go for it. I'm just going to grab the mic and just see what I can come up with and hopefully not sound too out of place or stutter too much or probably be nervous as hell, but whatever. All right, moving on. Paid time off, All right. Just a solar storm, bro. Okay. Hi. In one of your videos, you said 4 main effects control the world economy, and one is Cantillon effect. What's the rest of? Okay. Well, that's actually just something that I'm going to be talking about the Rebel Capitalist. So there's 4 economic theories. See, I didn't come up with these 4 economic theories. I kind of found that as I was going through my research, that 4 particular economic theories kept popping up when I would read articles. Like I would be like, man, this is definitely a sign of this particular theory, or this is nobody's taken into consideration of this particular economic theory when they're giving their opinion about a particular thing that's happening within the economy. And so I found that these things kept popping up over and over again. Now, the four economic theories, it's Gresham's law, Triffin's dilemma, the Bullwhip effect, and Cantillon effect. Right? Now, Cantillon effect I talk about all the time, right? Because it's this essay right here, Cantillon's essay on economic theory. The essay is much, much, much more in depth than the things that I talk about. The main part that I talk about within this essay is 3 chapters, the increase and decrease of money to the state. right? And with these 3 chapters, you can really get a good understanding of why it is that the manufacturers of a particular area leave and have foreign production move in. Like, a lot of people want to blame that on a political environment. Totally understand why, right? There's lots of blame to go around when it comes to that. But Cantillon describes it perfectly from an economic point of view, in that the rise in the standard of living has created a situation in which that the foreign imports are now cheaper than the domestic manufacturers can make them for. And that's the simplest way to explain it when it comes to the increase and decrease of money to the state. So understanding the Cantillon effect is huge, right? And it's a lot to it, especially, trying to read through this entire essay. Again, it's just the 3 chapters on the increase and decrease of money to a state that I really mostly focus in on. You can buy this essay, by the way. I left a link down in the description of this video. It's an Amazon affiliate link, so I'll get a little commission if you do buy the essay, but you don't have to buy the essay from Amazon. It's for free at the Mises Institute. You can go and download a copy of it and not have to pay anything for it. But very, very, very good piece of literature to read. So Cantillon effect, totally got that one. All right, Gresham's Law. Gresham's Law is very interesting. When it comes to bad money chases out good. And this is probably one of the oddest things for a lot of people to try and wrap their head around, especially a lot of the gold bugs out there or the anti-Federal Reserve people out there, is that they don't take into consideration Gresham's Law. Never do I really see this when I read articles or listen to the gold bugs out there. And here's the thing, and this is really easy to understand, because bad money will chase out the good, and only the bad money will exist in the economy. And now this is easy to understand from your own point of view. If you had a gold coin in one hand and a fiat currency like cash in the other, right? And you came to me, and I'm a merchant, and I'm going to sell you, this cup of coffee I have right here, right? I'm going to sell you this cup of coffee, and you have gold and you have cash. And you come to me and you're like, man, I want a cup of coffee. I'm like, yeah, no problem, man. I'll, $2, And he says, okay, do you want gold or do you want cash? And I say, I'll take either one. I don't care. Right? I'll take either one. They're both good to me. Right? Then are you going to hand me the gold coin? Honestly? If you have your chance to either hand me cash or hand me a gold coin, are you going to really give up your gold coin? Some people might, but never have I ever asked anybody that question that said, yes, I would give up my gold coin. Everybody said that they would give up the cash. So that's the same thing that I would find with any currency from any place, from anybody, is that they would hoard that gold and give up the cash. And that's what Thomas Gresham had figured out a long time ago, way back in the 1500s. He had figured this out through coin clipping, right? So you had a silver coin, but people would take that silver coin and they would clip off a little bit of the edge and save that silver for themselves, and then spend the rest of the coin at face value into the economy. And then pretty soon, what Thomas Gresham had found is that only clipped coins would be in circulation and unclipped coins would be hoarded away, because they would have more silver content than the clipped coins would, right? So the bad money, the clipped coins, were the ones that were in circulation, and the unclipped coins would be hoarded away, right? This is Gresham's Law. He figured it out a long time ago. So now, same thing is going to occur today. And I don't care if it's any currency out there. If you have Zimbabwe dollars, it's a bad currency. Are you going to come in and replace another bad currency like the US dollar with even worse currency, bad currency like Zimbabwe dollars? Hell no. That ain't going to work either. And you're not going to be able to introduce a gold currency either, because people would hoard it away. So it doesn't seem like there's any possibility other than having a bad currency in the system, until it completely collapses. And then Thayer's Law kicks in, which is the exact opposite of Gresham's Law. And it's not a competition to Gresham's Law, it's complementary to Gresham's Law. Because what it is stating is that if you have a currency that completely collapses and is no longer valued, the good currency comes in and replaces it. So good currency replaces bad currency when the bad currency completely collapses and is no longer accepted. Then the good currency comes in, whether it's a gold or a higher value currency like a dollar or something like that, in the case of Zimbabwe. People will say that there is legal tender laws that makes Gresham's Law no longer a real effective tool to study or whatever. That's not necessarily true, because the economic forces of Gresham's law is still underlying in the background, even if you have government control forcing people to use a particular currency, saying, no, you can't even use these other currencies at all. You're forced to use this particular one. And we can use this as an example, or we have an example of this taking place in Venezuela. Right? So Venezuela said you can only use the Bolivar. Well, the Bolivar was terrible. Nobody wanted to use it, right? And it wasn't a very good currency, and their economy was collapsing terribly, right? They had this inflationary pressures, and it was really bad, and it just sucked for everybody there, right? But then the government said, okay, fine. If you have US dollars, you can use them, right? They weren't allowed to use them before, so they were all hoarded away, right? But the Bolivar sucked, and it wasn't, it wasn't making the economy work. Well, all of a sudden, here comes this good currency rolling in, and it starts getting used, right? Because the Bolivar sucks, and everybody's just like, man, I got dollars, and look how much money, or look how much stuff I can get with this good dollars. So these dollars started entering into the system, into the Venezuelan economy, and things started picking up. People were like starting to operate. They were like, holy shit, man, we got business going on. We got things happening, and it's because of this new money that was pouring in from the allowing of the dollars, the US dollars, to enter into the economy. Well, everything was working out great as the people who had hoarded these dollars were taking advantage of how powerful these dollars, the purchasing power of these dollars were. And so they're out there in Venezuelan economy just killing it, doing really good, buying all this wonderful stuff. And then eventually the hoarded dollars from the savings that people had runs out. The most industrious people hoard all the dollars for themselves, right? Because, that's what ends up happening. And the bad currency, the Bolivar, finds its way back in, and the economy begins to slow down, and the only people who have the money are the people who are the most industrious and hoarded it away. Unless you have new money continually pouring in, it wasn't going to have a stimulating effect to the economy like it did when it first got released. So seeing it in that, I kind of like really simply blasted through that, but you can see the economic forces of Gresham's law were still in the background, even though that they had these legal tender laws forcing people to use the Bolivar. Soon as they released that law, boom, right? Economic forces come flowing through. Gresham's law and Triffin, or in Thier's law, started, kicking into gear. It's obvious when you see it that way. Like, it's just, most people don't know about the law, so they then have to come up with some reason for it happening, and then they just put it on the political mind, right? They're just like, well, that's it right there. It's politics. But, you have to understand there's economic, conditions taking place behind the scenes. All right. So that's Gresham's law and Thier's law. Triffin's dilemma. This one is really... Triffin's dilemma is really... it's a pretty interesting one when you really get into, like, what was taking place when the dollar started... Not necessarily started becoming the world reserve currency, but was essentially accepted as the world reserve currency. And we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier in the video, that how is it that the United States is going to provide the world with dollars? Like, this is a problem because there is a demand for dollars outside of the United States that is far bigger than what anybody had ever known. See, like, two nations want to do a deal with each other, right? And one of them writes up a contract. Hey, I owe you this much money, right? That contract is due in dollars. Right? They borrowed it in dollars. It's due back in dollars. Now, these contracts between these two people, or this contract between these two people, has nothing to do with the United States. Doesn't have anything to do with our government, our banks, people, corporations, nothing. Doesn't have anything to do with the United States at all. All right? In fact, we don't even know this contract exists. Right? Because, like, why would we? Right? It's between two people. But this contract does exist, and it's due in dollars. That means there is a demand for dollars existing on this contract that is outside of the United States. That means at some point, the people who need to pay that contract are going to try and get a hold of dollars to do it. Now, if there's enough people who have had these contracts who need to get a hold of dollars to pay them back, they're going to start trying to get these dollars. It's going to start strengthening the dollar. Right? Now, what happens when you start to strengthen the dollar? It screws up the manufacturing here in the United States. Now, part of the United States is manufacturing and distributing stuff to the world, and the last thing we want is a severe trade imbalance. But that is what would end up happening, is that we would have less stuff to sell if there was this rise in the dollar. So now we got to figure out a way to get the dollars out there to the rest of the world. And now the easiest way to get these dollars out there to the rest of the world is to buy their stuff. And now again, I'm kind of like simplifying this really quickly, but if we think about it for just a minute, we go back in time to like the, prior to the 1970s, the United States was a manufacturing powerhouse. We produced stuff and sent it out there to the world. The world sent us their gold. We had all the gold, and we were starting to raise our standard of living. This is part of the Cantillon effect. Once we started raising our standard of living, we started buying those foreign imports, those foreign production. Once we started buying the foreign production, we were exporting the gold. Now, when it got to the Nixon administration, they recognized that if this continued on, we were going to find ourselves in poverty and misery. That we would export all our gold, buying all this foreign production, and we would fail. Right? Now, there's a couple of things you can do. You can say, that's it. We are not going to bring in this foreign production anymore, which means that you need to lessen the standard of living of the people because they're going to want that stuff, right? And so this was a problem. You can't do that necessarily to the people saying, hey, we're going to have to diminish your standard of living. Like nobody's going to be accepting of that. But they will be accepting of an increase in the standard of living. So instead of severing us, or instead of allowing the gold to flow out of the country, which should have been the natural thing that would occur, instead, what we did is we severed ourselves from the gold standard and started issuing out debt, started issuing out these dollars, started buying a lot of the foreign production and pushing those dollars out there to the rest of the world. And now this is what Triffin found out, is that you would have to be, if you were going to be the issuer of the world trade currency, the dollar, right, for our case, then you would have to run trade deficits in order to provide the world with those dollars. If you are running trade deficits, that means your manufacturing base cannot grow strong and be an exporting nation that would give you that producing saving nation. Right? See, this is Triffin's dilemma. How do you do this? You can't. Right? So you can't be a provider of the world with currency and be the provider of the world with stuff, because the two don't jive together. All right. What was that? So that was Gresham's Law, Triffin's Dilemma. Oh, the Bullwhip effect. Bullwhip effect, easy kind of understand. It's when there's obscurities within the market as far as the distribution line goes. So manufacturers, distributors, wholesalers, retailers, all the way down to, I guess retailers at the end of the line. But all these people have a different part within the supply chain. They all have inventory and they all have distribution to them. So now what ends up happening is that there's obscurities that ends up taking place either within the, some kind of disruption, whether it was a disruption in manufacturing or a disruption in retail, and for whatever reason, there's some sort of obscurity that takes place. And like in the case of just recently, it was COVID, right? All these people were told to stay home and don't go to work, don't produce. Well, that gap in production is what created the situation, right? So now you have this situation in which that there is a gap in production that has taken place, which leaves this inventory gap, which all of a sudden leaves this idea of where it is. Nobody knows exactly where inventory levels should be. So when you have all of a sudden some missing product within the system, right? And you have these people who are in high demand of this product. They keep going to find it. They can't find it. They're willing to pay a higher price for it. Still can't find the product. The demand for the product goes up big time. Right? So in the case of lumber, if you can't find lumber anywhere, there's not enough of it. Well, next thing you know, and you have an inelastic demand, meaning you have a contract to build a house, you're going to pay any price for that lumber. And this is one of the reasons why we saw lumber go from, $4 for a 2x4, 8-foot standard and better up to $13.50. Right? It's because it's simply unavailable out there. Well, next thing you see, prices really elevate because of this. So you have a gap in production. You all of a sudden have retail demand elevated because of the missing product from this gap in production. The elevated retail demand has the prices up there. You have now the retailers, wholesalers, distributors asking for this product in a high demand to take advantage of these high prices. So what would typically be a normal order would then be elevated, right? With this elevated order, you're seeing demand. Demand starts moving its way through the supply chain all the way up to the manufacturers, who are getting high demand requests from all these people, but it wasn't really necessarily a high demand. It was a gap in production that was creating the situation. Right? Now, a couple of things can create this high demand that's starting to move up to the manufacturers, who just start ramping it up, right? They're getting a high price, they got this high demand, they start loading up on production to get it out there to get it out there to the retail. But now a couple of things can start creating this high demand issue. See, like typically somebody might say, well, I want 3 units, right? And they say, okay, yeah, you want 3 units, but we don't really have anything. You're on allocation. We're going to send you 1, right? And it was just like, but I need 3. I need 3 to do my business, right? But you're only going to send me 1. I'm sorry, I need 10. I need 10 units, right? And not 3, I need 10. And the hope is that by ordering 10, you're going to get allocated to 3, what you truly wanted. So you didn't want 10, you only wanted 3, but since you're being allocated, you ordered 10 so that you could get what you truly wanted. Now, again, the distribution line doesn't recognize this. They don't recognize that this is what, the buyer is doing, over ordering because they're being allocated against. They actually see a real order entering into the system. Right? So they're looking at an order of 10, not knowing that the person just really wants 3. So they start manufacturing with the idea that there's 10 going to be sold here in the future as they produce it, only to come to fruition to find that they only wanted 3. Now you have this overproduction that is sitting within the economy. We can see this in cars right now. Like, cars are definitely showing their signs of this. We found it in lumber. We found it in all kinds of things that were out there. Pork and chicken. Like, pork and chicken facilities just suffered a major consequences of this, like, what, about 6 months to a year ago? And it's once you kind of recognize that to be the case, like, once you have a gap in production, if you cannot get the product, the price of that product will go up. If the price of the product goes up, the demand, or the demand side of it, from the wholesalers, retailers, from the people who want to sell, right? They want to take advantage of that high prices. They want to sell at that high price. The manufacturers want to sell at that high price. Everybody wants to take advantage of that high price that's in the distribution side of things, right? So they ramp up production, but by the time it gets there, the demand for it is gone because it never really truly existed in the first place. And this is what we're going to find throughout many parts of the economy. The bullwhip effect is not a simultaneous thing that happens in the economy. It happens, it hits and fires all over the place, and it really depends on, like, the speed of production, the longevity of the gap in production. You think about it, lumber is a well-established, well-functioning commodity here in the United States. When the gap in production took place and they fired it back, fired up the manufacturing again to take advantage of those high prices, they brought lumber right back. Like, it went from couldn't find lumber anywhere to all of a sudden there was a flood of lumber and there was stacks of it everywhere, right? And that's because how well established it's not. I mean, there is some foreign production when it comes from Canada, but for the most part, it's completely 100% domestic. There is no need for any kind of foreign anything. It's our, we export some of it, but for the most part, we consume all that we make, right? We import a little bit from Canada. We have a well-established, well-functioning distribution line of it. It was like no problem when it came to lumber. Yet everybody focused in on it when it came to the inflation scenario. All right, $1,700 per thousand, money printed per, prices go up, but nobody can explain why lumber went back down to its normal price, except for, the uneducated economist who called it out when it was at its high. You guys are awesome. How long do you want to hang out here for? We got 776 people watching right now. 746 likes. My goodness, guys. Thank you so much for hitting that like button. This is a great stream going on today. I was really only planning on being out here for, half an hour, but now we're an hour and 34 minutes into it. All right. Trucking rates are terrible right now, yeah. Creating a trust is the way at the moment. It's tanking. Okay, our purpose. There were rail cars full of lumber spotted out in the middle of nowhere, supply and demand. Yeah, but you also have to understand, like, okay, so lumber, like here in the Pacific Northwest, like I never saw missing lumber. Like I didn't see where there was not like missing, like everywhere I looked there was lumber. Okay, but I'm in lumber country, right? I mean, Oregon is the number one lumber producing state in the nation. I don't know if that's still the case, but it was for a long time. If not, it's a major producer. It's probably, if it's not number one, it's very close to. Right? So there's lumber everywhere here, but not everywhere in the country was there lumber, right? So you might find some spots that was just absolutely loaded. All these rail cars full of lumber, distribution hubs full of lumber, but then you would find another spot in the country that had no lumber in it. Now, you have to think, like, I can envision lumber a lot like water, flowing like water. Now, you have to cut a tree. You have to take that tree off the hill. You have to haul it to the mill. You have to mill it all up, right? You have to stack it into units, put it on a truck, send it off to a distribution hub, where it then gets moved to another location where it eventually finds its retailer, right? It finds a wholesaler and then off to a retailer. So there's this huge chain that it follows, right? It goes from a rail truck to semi trucks to forklifts to smaller trucks. You know, it has this place that it goes to. Now, if you can imagine that way up there on the hill, they quit cutting a tree, right? The last tree stopped falling, but the distribution line is still pulling lumber, right? So pretty soon, there's no new lumber coming into the system. The mills aren't getting new trees. They're not operating. They're not milling up new lumber, right? So their level is starting to fall, right? No new trees, no new lumber, right? Gets onto the rails. Rails start hauling it away pretty soon. They get to their location and they're emptying out, right? They got no more lumber going in there. And you start working back towards the mill and you're going to find less lumber and less lumber at the distribution hubs on the rails until you get closer and closer to the mill, right? And that's where you're going to start finding the supply again. So if you can imagine it again like water, you're in Arizona. There's probably not a lot of mills and trees and, you know, distribution hubs and stuff like that happening in Arizona or New Mexico. All right, somewhere like that. But they still use lumber down there, right? They still need a flow of supply going into this particular region. So now you think about it. It's time to fire the lumber back up. Well, you got to fall those trees, right? Those trees need to be starting to move off the hill. They need to get to the mill. The mill needs to ramp up production. Their inventory needs to build. They need to start moving that inventory to the distribution hubs, which means it starts filling up the rail lines. Those rail lines start to fill up, start to move to the distribution hubs. The distribution hubs start to fill up. They start moving out there towards the wholesalers, right? They still haven't made it to Arizona or New Mexico yet, but all these other places are starting to fill up as that flow of lumber starts to find its way through the distribution lines. Eventually, it finds its way all the way to the dry markets, and that flow begins to become very steady. And this is the reason why. Like, you have areas, if you have loads of lumber sitting in the Pacific Northwest and you have no lumber sitting in New Mexico, Arizona, you know, areas like this, or even, it doesn't matter where it's not at, right? If it's just not in a certain area, lumber is pretty much considered a fungible commodity. Right, the lumber I have here is the same as the lumber over there, right? And number 2 standard and better Doug fir, right? Now there is different species and different prices for those species, but ultimately we don't look at it like that when it comes to like the futures market or the distribution of it or anything else, right? The lumber here is the lumber down there. So if the demand for lumber is incredibly high in Arizona and New Mexico because it's not there, it's going to affect the price up here in the Pacific Northwest as well. So even though we're sitting on tons of lumber, because of the demand that's occurring in a place where it doesn't exist or where the distribution of it is very limited, it's creating high prices in places where there's plenty of lumber. And this is the reason why people are like, oh, it's greed and demand, you know, whatever. There's plenty of lumber all over the place, but yet the prices are all high. Yeah, there's plenty of lumber where you're standing, But there's not plenty of lumber where that dude is, and he's willing to pay a high price for it because he doesn't have it. And because he's willing to pay a high price for it, you're going to pay a high price for it too. That's really how the lumber system worked, right? I mean, I could see it. Like, I mean, I saw it, like, I could see it easily because of the position that I was in. I mean, I work lumber for a living. I was, in communications with the wholesalers, distributors, mills, other retailers out there. It was a very easy thing for me to see, where, and it was also easier for me to see, especially when I went to the mainstream media and reading these articles about lumber and realizing that all these people were delusional in their speaking. They were using a lot of assumptions and, misunderstandings and, just very, incorrect beliefs. And I saw that running rampant through the mainstream media. And I thought, man, they all got it wrong, and that's one of the reasons, and that's the only reason why I believe that I was able to call out lumber as accurately as I was when it was running at $1,700 per thousand, and the money, there was no interest rate hikes or anything happening yet. And I said it then. I said lumber will go back down to its normal price once the distribution lines fire back up. Boom, happened, right? And it was from the point of view that I was standing, I could easily say, no, it's not that, no, it's not that, no, it's not that. Right? It was like, it wasn't greed, it wasn't the money printer, it wasn't these things. Right? It was the Bullwhip effect, it was the inelastic money supply, the inelastic demand due to the money supply, or in conjunction with the money supply. There we go. That's what I'm trying to say. All that stuff. All right. Did I miss them all? Did I get it all? That was the 4 economic theories. All right, 757 people, 786 likes. You guys are really enjoying this live stream. I'm really appreciate you all being here too. You're right. I live in the Northwest, live near lumber mills. The futures market washes away cost of location and drive up prices for everyone. Well, it's just the price, right? I mean, is the futures the price for everyone, or is a mill like not participating in the price for everyone? Like, a mill is in the game of selling their commodity to the market, just the same as everybody else is, right? Like, a mill could say, oh no, I don't sell to anybody else except for, my few people over here. And they could figure out how to try and, distribute that much lumber to just, a select few group of people. It doesn't work like that. They distribute to the market, right? Like, to the broad market. And so in that broad market, prices are found using futures. And, that's just the way it is. I decided to quit my business when the IRS agent said, don't forget you need to pay your tax 1 quarter in advance when I was taking losses. Yeah, I don't know. The whole taxes IRS thing, it's all voluntary, and whether or not we decide to do something against it, I just don't know what it is that can be done. All right. Actually, God's kingdom already came. Okay, well, we'll move on. All right. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the religious aspect of things. This is that we're not much of a religious speaking channel here. All right. If mills burned on purpose drives up demand, dollars go. I didn't find it. I could not find this crap load of misinformation talking about how all these mills across the country were burning up. Now, I found an excellent YouTube channel that was talking about the mills burning up. I don't know how many mills that they were mentioning, showing one right after the other, boom, 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 this mill, that mill, that, and he's going on, and these are all in different states and all over the place, and he's just going on and on about it, right? And I'm thinking, damn, this is a very, very telling video. So I started doing the research that he had done, and I was realizing that all the mills, not all of them, the majority of the mills that dude was covering, and the majority of the mills that were burning down were smaller boutique mills. And what I mean by that is that they are not the mills that are producing the lumber that we are using to frame houses. Very big difference. They are all types of mills out there that produce all kinds of lumber. The lumber that we were talking about, the lumber that everybody was focusing in on, the lumber that is being produced by those mills were not the ones that were burning down. The ones that were burning down were the mills that were producing lumber that is not for framing. Now, some of them did catch fire. I guarantee you, like there was some issues with some of those mills. But all those mills that were burning down all over the country or whatever, all these reports of them, they weren't the mills that produced lumber. Not framing lumber, right? Some of them were, but not the majority of those, right? And yes, it is lumber that is used to build houses, right? But it's trim work, it's, the sidings, it's all kinds of like the specialty parts of a house, all the different things that are made. But that framing lumber, that Standard and Better 2x4 stuff that they were getting, that was not coming from those mills, not the ones that were burning down. And so I had to call bullshit on that. It was not right. That was an inaccurate video, and then it was claiming things about the lumber industry that were not right, and I could see it. Right? Again, like I did the research on that as well. And here's another thing that people don't seem to understand, right? Wildfires. They said, no, it was all these wildfires that did it, right? Okay, I will give that to you, that wildfires create some situations when it comes to the lumber industry, especially keeping the loggers out of the woods, right? You can't go up there and work when they're on fire, right? So therefore, you're not going to be able to bring any product out of the woods. What a lot of people don't realize is that once the fire is over, the mills go into salvage mode. They start cutting up an insane amount of lumber from these burnt trees to try and salvage as much as they can out of it. It actually creates an oversupply of lumber after the wildfire is over, right? Because not all of them burn the trees completely up. It chars the outside, but the inside is still good. The only problem is it's now a dead tree, and if they let it sit there, it's gonna rot. So they have to do something about it, and they have to do it quick. Right? So that actually, like during the time of the fire, it creates a situation, but directly after that, it creates another situation of an oversupply, to try and, make advantage of those trees. I mean, like, I don't know what anybody could possibly bring up that I didn't do any research on when it came to lumber. I was doing it every single day for hours a day on the phone with all kinds of people so that I could put out videos on YouTube. That was so different from everybody else, and my channel was just like taking off at the time, so I was like really adamant about doing it. All the greed and manipulation stories that you heard, not a single person has taken into consideration that the years prior to the run-up, mills were suffering in failure and bankruptcies and going out of business. You want to read some sad stories, read about 100 Mile up in British Columbia shutting down during 2019, prior to the pandemic. All right? I mean, I was like, you can go back and find the videos that I did on my channel all throughout 2019 talking about the devastation to the British Columbia mills, how the inventory levels were dropping dramatically. Like, I was covering that stuff. It didn't have anything to do with wildfires, and it had a little bit to do with wildfires, and it didn't have anything to do with mills burning down. All right? Like, I had the real information. Everybody else was going off of assumptions and misunderstandings and anything else. Like, I didn't do that. Like, if I had a question for it, I was on the phone. Hey, what's going on? What are you seeing? What are you doing? Right? Like, I wasn't like, oh, look at here. They earned this much money this year and this much money this year, and look how greedy they are. And I'm thinking, yeah, do you realize that same company laid off about 1,000 people a couple of years ago when they shut down 6 mills? Right? Because they didn't have the lumber prices elevated like they are today. Like, I mean, I laugh at that stuff. I really do. All right, sun, moon, it has nothing to do with that. Let's see here. Okay, I'm just stating that scripture says, but you guys would rather hear about how crypto will fix the mess. No, listen, I mean, I have absolutely nothing against religious belief, right? In fact, I feel somewhat like encouraged by people who do have that kind of belief, right? That there's higher powers above them that are at work. Because I actually believe that there is higher powers at work, Now, whether or not that we're going to say those same powers are coming from the likes of God, or if they're just universal powers that resemble that same statement, right? Now, whether or not you say it has to be told in this particular story, I don't know if that's necessarily the story I want to hear. We may have the same beliefs, but I may not call it what you call it. And by not calling it what you call it, you may not agree with me. Well, I agree with you. Right? Alright. When I hear religion, I think megachurch. I don't. When I think of religion, I think of spiritual. I think spirituality. Right? That's what I think of. I don't think of organizations. I don't think of a church. I don't think of anything like that. I think of just spirituality, you know. And I think there's all kinds of things that can then be built from that. But anyway, we're not a religious channel. Let's move on. Benny, hey, what's happening, man? Okay, what do you got to say? Here we go. All right, Simon, our houses are trending toward brick build for the rest of the decade. I don't think so. Like, I don't know what it is that's going to come to the market that's going to change anything about the way that houses or buildings or anything else are constructed, except the only thing that I could see that would ever add any kind of change in a serious fashion to the industry the way we see it now is the cross-laminated timber industry. Right? That's the only thing that I could really see making a major impact to the way that construction is handled today, because the cross-laminated timber industry means that you can actually have all the parts and pieces pre-manufactured off-site, delivered and directly put into place once it gets to the job site itself. Typical construction takes place at site with fabrication happening at the site itself. And so what cross-laminated timber can do is fabricate those pieces and then make it easier to ship and make it less impactful in the environment around. Most of this is going to be for like high-rises and institutional buildings, hospitals, libraries, whatever, apartment complexes. That's really where this cross-laminated timber industry is going to find its use, but they can do it in residential as well. So it very well could be that we find in the future cross-laminated timber being more used inside of the new construction industry than, say, your typical stick-built home, or brick or concrete and rebar, or even the 3D printed homes, which I think is probably an okay concept for weather permitting areas. But like here in the Pacific Northwest, 9 months out of the year it's raining, and I don't know if those are going to be a really effective way to build houses around here. All right. Brody says, rock solid investment, Benny. What was Benny talking about? Benny says, currently investing heavily in lots of concrete. Rock solid investment. Good one, Brody. People are decided religion or not. All right. Invincibility. You cannot find unity in all of the religious groups for all because they only know who is their... Okay. It's funny. Since you guys just want to talk about religion, listen, I heard something a while back that I thought was pretty interesting. And now I don't want to knock any religion. I believe that everybody who has a belief is valid in their beliefs. I don't find any one religion to be right or wrong or anything else like that. I just find them to be a belief. Now, something that I found very interesting about Christianity and the beliefs of Jesus Christ is that this is something that because I'm a very big question asker, right? I ask a lot of questions about stuff, right? And mainly I ask questions towards the religious aspect of things for the history that it tells, right? Because where are you going to find history books as old as the Bible or the Quran or something of that nature, right? These are history stories. So whether they're told accurately or not, again, it's up to whoever. Now, most of these religions that I find out there actually not necessarily accept Jesus as the way, but as a possible way. Like he was like a prophet, a disciple. He was He was one of the dudes, right? And now, not necessarily does all the religions look at it and say like, man, he was the best, like the best at it. Like they think their way is the best. Like what I have is the right way. What he had is a way, right? And that's the way a lot of these religions look at it. Is that, like even the Quran, the Quran, if I remember this right, mentions 2 women in the entire book, and Mary is one of them, Jesus' mother, right? The Virgin Mary is looked upon in the Quran as like this, like, if I got it right, is like, this awesome person. Like even Jesus was looked at as like this super cool rock star, right? He was a badass, and his mom was a badass too, right? And that's the way like the Quran kind of views this, which is very weird to think, because most people wouldn't see it like that. They think like, something very different of it. But now, when I think about these things, it's just like, okay, so most of these religions that I find kind of look at Jesus as being one of like, these awesome people who were around doing this, like, this rising up of this religious beliefs or whatever it was that their beliefs were, right? And I'm not trying to get too technical on these things, but here's the thing. Jesus, the Christianity, that's the only way. Like, all these rest of these religions looked at like Jesus Christ, and that is saying, yeah, he's one of the ways, right? He's the possibility. We are too. But Jesus says, no, I'm the only one, right? And now I find that to be very interesting, that not like the other religions accepted the idea, like that he's one of the ways. But when it comes to Christianity, it's the only way. Isn't that interesting to think about, right? Like whether it's right or wrong, or, the right way, the correct way, wrong way, it doesn't matter, right? None of this, kind of step that aside for just a second, right? And just look at it for just a minute and think about that, right? All these other religions out there looked at that and said, yeah, he's one of these ways. He's a possible way. We are too. Our way may be better, right? But that's a way. And I thought I find that to be very interesting about these religions out there. And take it from somebody who's not even religion. Like, I didn't even know any of this stuff, right? I mean, I'm just like, okay, so tell me about, whatever. And like, I don't know, But that's something that somebody else had mentioned one time, and I thought, man, you're right about that. That is something that I do now recognize within most religions out there. All right. All the religious like Jesus. I didn't say he liked it. I said he was one of the ways. Right? Okay. I'm pretty sure one of them didn't like Jesus. Again, I'm not trying to say that they liked him. I said that he was one of the ways, right? And it doesn't mean that you have to, say, no, man, I mean, I got this way, but dude, that dude, woo! All right? I mean, that's not what I'm saying, right? And don't take it as that. Like, I'm just trying to say, like, these religions out there mention this. And again, I guess it's all about interpretation of that. It's not by work of mankind, but what Jesus worked for us. Man, why did we get on religion? Can we get into something else? Can we talk about economics instead? All right, Greek writings. I don't know if I even really want to continue on here. Let's see. They cannot be true. One holds up the test of time and has the evidence to back the others. Not so much. Okay. Can the economy... Here we go. Much better. All right. Can the economy self-sustain through the consumption of the wealthy, since higher rates benefit the wealthy, the increase of real wages, safety nets of the lower tiers at the expense of the middle class? Can the economy self-sustain that way? Well, I don't, maybe, I guess. If it's, especially if you have some kind of like a implementation of like a UBI or MMT type of like attitude towards the economy, like, either like an MMT or company or whatever it is, right? Something that you can inject money into the hands of the people at the lower class and tax out the people at the upper class, then yeah, maybe you can kind of do something about governing the separation between the rich and the poor. But you just have to understand that our system is built on a way of bringing new money into the system. Without bringing new money into the system, you will have a collapse into poverty and misery. So, what are we going to do to try and make it equal and fair? You're not going to make it equal and fair. It's just not going to happen. There's no equality or fairness about it. None. Right. And so it's better to accept it from that point of view. That way you can now make decisions that what is going to be good for you and what it is that you can go on about it, So again, like when we look at a self-sustaining economy, yeah, I mean, I guess if that's like, what can happen, but you're asking for government intrusion into every aspect of your entire life, right? In order to make that happen. Like, can we make this self-sustaining? Well, sure. Like, you want to fight against the economic forces that are out there, then you have to have more government. And you have to have government intervention and regulations and control and ever increasing amounts of it. Like, once the government gets involved with it, the economic forces will grow behind the scenes until then now it takes ever increasing amount of government interaction or intervention or whatever. Just like what we were experiencing right now with like the tariffs in the subsidies. As time goes on, that's going to get worse, right? It'll be ever increasing amounts of tariffs and ever increasing amounts of subsidies in order to keep the manufacturers here in the United States, right? In order to prevent the foreign production from overwhelming our inventory of manufacturers here. So this is like, the problem. Like, and as time goes on, that problem grows. And because we are not going through what would be the natural consequences of the Cantillon effect, we're trying to prevent that from happening. It takes ever increasing amounts of government intervention to deal with those economic forces that are ever growing in the background. And it's just like, I don't know what can be done about it. Like, again, I don't try to look for the solutions of it. I just try to figure out what it is I need to do to position myself for it. Alrighty, guys, we're 2 hours into this. I don't know if I can keep talking. I'm starting to slur my words a little bit, and we're really getting off topic here. So thank you for getting back to the economy, sir. People are going to believe what they believe, and in this case, won't change anything. I don't expect anybody to change anything about the way they believe, right? I was just merely stating something about my own understandings and in view of what's happening out there. So again, like most of my understanding of that particular topic is very low. All right, how many times can you talk about how bad the government is before you realize you are on a loop? Go find another channel, bro. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. If you don't like the topics, go find another channel. All right, the part that scares me is that so many people aren't trying to really understand why stuff is so broken. No, people don't. Well, it's because trying to understand it takes a lot of work, right? And it's not like they don't want to understand it, and it's not like they probably wouldn't even want to put in the work. It's just like the work that you have to put into understanding it is so depressing. It's so overwhelming. It's so disheartening that living in ignorance is bliss. Like, it's really like, if you don't want to truly know about it, I don't blame you, because it's depressing, right? And if you can live in blissful ignorance through your entire life, then does it make any difference, right? Does it make any difference to taking the information or not? So I mean, it's really a choice that you're going to make to try and, to become somebody who understands a lot of this stuff. And a lot of it is have to accept the idea that the information that you're about ready to take on is going to be somewhat damaging to your mental health, right? I mean, it really is. And then once you kind of understand that, you have to be very aware of how depressing the information is so that you don't fall into that depressive lifestyle. Most people don't want to do it. Like, they start reading through this stuff and they're like, screw that. Like, and too much negative energy for me, And I totally get it. I totally get why. All right, look, guys, when you buy soda, all the pennies added taxes into that soda are increasing value of transportation production in all the phase it goes through. That makes total sense. Thank you for your efforts. Thank you. Blissfully ignorant towards poisonous snakes. Yeah, I mean, yeah. right? I mean, but if it doesn't make any difference in your life, like if you can live your entire life and suffer no consequences from taking on this information or the lack of not taking on the information, then what difference does it make? Right? It doesn't make any difference here. You could be like, man, there's a bunch of horrible people out there who are, gonna ruin our lives. And if you don't accept the information and then it doesn't actually occur to you, then what difference? Like, you lived happily without that information. You didn't even have to think about it. There's people out there who do. They live their entire lives that way. Hey, Simon, question. If, as per Gresham's law, bad money chases out good, why doesn't every little currency equivalent, e.g. tradable store loyalty points, start chasing money out of the system? Convenience. Like, you can't use a store loyalty you can't use a store loyalty from one store over to another, right? So the currency has to be fungible in the most sense. Like the same currency here is the same currency over there. And so if you have access to this store with this particular, loyalty point or something of that nature, well, you can't take those over to another store, right? And so, I mean, I think that's kind of like the idea of what you're saying. Like, why wouldn't the loyalty part? Anyway, I think I got that. All right, now moving on here. If Richard Cantillon said that land is the source from all wealth is produced, right? Why is it not the priority list for most investors? Instead, people buy crypto, useless stocks, bonds before land. I don't know. What do you think, like, the most richest people in the world buy? Like, what is Bill Gates buying? Right. Like, I know there's a lot of places that people can put money to try and get a return. But when it comes to the owning of land, that's not something that you can really make more of. It's a very limited supply. And those who buy massive amounts of it, they know why they're doing it, right? I mean, so there's loads of places that you can go to. Like, the average person is probably not looking at buying a chunk of land for an investment reason. Like, investors are looking for turnaround. They're looking for something they can punch into a screen and then get back out again. Right? And that's not farmland for them. Now, there might be investment trusts or something like that they can get into that would be part of the farmland aspect of stuff. But most people probably aren't looking towards things like that. Simon, you state supply chain breakdown caused inflation. No, I said it had more to do with inflation than the money printer. I didn't say it was the cause, right? Is the bullwhip effect caused inflation? No. The bullwhip effect is a response to obscurities within the distribution network, right? So when the shutdowns took place and that severing of the supply chain, that gap in production created a moment in which that there was no inventory out there, or very little inventory. Now, at the same time that this severing of the supply chain took place, creating this gap in which that inventory would not come back to the retailers, there was a stimulus check handed out. It was very well timed. That zapped what little inventory that was left out there, and it wasn't being replenished. If you do not have supply-demand imbalances occur. If it was just the stimulus checks, we may have, for a short time, created some inflationary pressures as that money would have gone out there and started creating the purchases, started chasing the goods and services. However, without the severing of the supply chain, it would have been short-lived. It would have been like a flash in the pan and it would have been over. It was the severing of the supply chain that really established the shortages that we experienced. And with the shortages that we experienced, the supply-demand imbalances created the price increases. And when you had the price increases moving up and the shortages that we experienced and the hyper-vigilant, attentive mainstream media putting it out there that we were running into a hyperinflation scenario and broadcasting it out there every day, that it was the money printer that was causing it, it makes it very easy for the people to fall into a higher inflation expectations due to the money printer go burr kind of concepts of it, right? But it was the gap in production leaving the inventory missing, right? See, now we see like the inventory is now flowing back in. Lumber reestablished right back to its normal price. Like all the inflation that existed in lumber vanished, gone, like absolutely gone, nowhere to be found. And people say, oh no, the dollar lost value. Like the dollar's losing value. That's what's doing it. And I'm like, okay, well then lumber must be in one serious deflationary, condition in order to be at the same price it was prior to the money printer. Right? In fact, it must be suffering in a hyper deflationary scenario, considering that there's now an added cost into the price of the futures today that wasn't in the price prior to the pandemic. See, they changed the way these futures are priced because now they have an added rail cost going to Chicago that wasn't in there before. So now, with this added rail cost, the futures price should be much lower than it was prior to the pandemic. But even at the added rail cost feature put into the future price, it is now sitting at the same price that it was prior to the pandemic. Like literally, lumber must be in a hyper deflationary scenario in order to suffer the consequences of a devaluing dollar that then brings lumber prices into better position. Like it doesn't, like, does that make sense? Like how does a dollar devalue and lumber prices become better? It doesn't, right? The dollar devalues and lumber becomes more expensive. That's how devaluing of a dollar works. But if lumber becomes cheaper, at the same time, this idea that there was this devaluing dollar, is it really a devaluing dollar or is it an inventory shortage that was creating it? Because there's plenty of inventory for lumber now and the prices are normal. But there's not necessarily plenty of inventory out there of all these other items. Right? You're going to see cars get cheap here before too long. Like, I don't know if they're going to go back to the way they were, but they're going to be a lot cheaper than they were. That's for sure, as they try to unload them. Man, 600 people watching. I can't believe it. We almost 700. All right, ordinary Bitcoin, $1.99. Can't afford homes. Bitcoin is hard asset option. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. Like, I didn't mean for it to be, but cryptocurrencies is my biggest position when it comes to like any single thing that I have put money towards. And that's just because really cryptocurrencies have moved up so dramatically high over the years that I've been purchasing it. But really, when we think about Bitcoin as like purchasing an asset for the future, ooh, man, like I have very little expectations of it doing anything really grand in that fashion. Now, with that being said, I'm very hopeful of the idea that it would go to $1 million and I would be able to pay my house off with my Bitcoin, right? Like, I love that idea. But my expectations of it are pretty low, right? My expectations of moving into a house or owning property or buying other properties, that would be very high. Like, I would expect whatever it is that I do on that kind of investment, I would have very high expectations from that. Like, the return, the profits, all that other stuff. Not the same expectations that I would have from Bitcoin. Moving on. Bitcoin or any crypto has no intrinsic value. Yeah, it does have value, though. It may not be necessarily like, that's not true, because it has a communication value. And that may not necessarily be like, it can conduct, electricity kind of value, or it can filter water kind of value, but it does communicate value. And that is pretty unique for what it can do. And it can do it in a way that nothing else can do. Right? Like, people might say, well, no, gold can be the same as Bitcoin. It's not. Bitcoin is not physical. Gold is physical. If I want to transfer my gold to somebody in China, I would have to mail it to them, physically take it to them, somehow, trust that it would make it to their location. With Bitcoin, all I have to do is just punch in their address, hit go, and hit send, and that's it. I don't have to trust anybody. I don't have to trust anything, except my belief that the Bitcoin protocol is going to continue to work. And with that, I don't have to worry about government stopping it. Right? They may have some sort of idea that they can control it and telling me that I can't do it, but they can't stop me from doing it if I choose to do it, right? Because once I hit send on that, it's going through. So that's a pretty neat feature to have. And as long as somebody has access to the internet, you're going to be able to transact with them. There's really nothing else in the world that can do it quite like that. So Bitcoin is a unique item. It's very unique. And it doesn't have no value to it. It has lots of value to it. And just in that what I just explained. And there's many more items to it too, or many more features to it that are valuable. All right. Speaking of Bitcoin, do you agree with Peter Schiff's take of cryptocurrencies is that gold is more valuable? Yes, I agree that gold is more valuable than Bitcoin. And again, like I have my reasonings behind this too, because really you can take it down to an easy explanation like this, right? If you have gold in one hand and Bitcoin in the other, well, you wouldn't have Bitcoin, but you have the idea of Bitcoin in the other, right? Here's the thing. If you removed one of these two items, what would happen to the world? Like, what would happen to society? What would happen to the way that we conduct ourselves? Everything. Like, what would happen if one of these two items was to be removed? So let's remove Bitcoin for just a second, right? Now, there are people who use Bitcoins. They do it for transactions. There might be some sort of like, business aspect of it that might diminish the economy a tiny little bit, right? There might be some features of it that change. Probably not a whole lot of impact. Some people would be real pissed, but the overall economy would probably continue to conduct itself the way it is today, right? Without much disruption, right? Maybe a little bit. Take gold out of the system, and now you're going to have some serious disruptions. I mean, let alone the financial system, but you're going to have disruptions to technology and communications and the way that we conduct ourselves in our daily lives. Like, you take gold out of the economy, out of the world, and you're going to have an instant shutting down of the world, right? Not so much with Bitcoin. In fact, Bitcoin wouldn't even exist without gold, right? So gold is much better than Bitcoin, because Bitcoin, it goes away, nothing changes. Gold, it goes away, everything changes. All right, Bitcoin is dial-up internet of cryptocurrency. Silver has more intrinsic use. All we can do is introduce something they can't stop. Yeah, but even still, like, you can introduce crypto, you can introduce gold, you can introduce this stuff, but does Gresham's law allow it to continue? Like, you have to have a collapse of the original currency, a complete loss of faith, right? Once that starts to take place, then I totally agree. You can introduce crypto and gold and all this other stuff, and there probably wouldn't even be much resistance. All right. You're extremely intelligent, Simon. Thanks again for the time and effort you put into clarifying these issues for us. Yeah, you bet, man. Well, and it is, like, you guys have to think, this is just my opinion. You have to take it with, for what it is. Like, I'm not educated in any of this stuff. I just did a lot of research. I've done a lot of reading, a lot of studying of the Federal Reserve, trying to really internalize monetary policy from the Fed's point of view and not from some wacko job out there on the internet, like myself, I guess, which is funny to think, but I leave the information for you, right? If you don't believe me, the links are down in the description. That's the reason why I put them there, is so that you can go and actually read that stuff for yourself to make your own view, like to have your own opinion of it. Mine is just one of what many people can have for an opinion about the information that I find. But I keep going through this stuff and I can't seem to find like the arguments that work against it. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people have a lot of arguments that they believe are much different from it. But from the things that I've researched and I've found, I think I've nailed monetary policy better than anybody has. In fact, I got it so good that I think I could even sit in the room with the Federal Reserve and discuss monetary policy with them using their jawboning, signaling, forward guidance, credible threat theory, and how it is that they are going to explain things to the public in a way that would actually convince them to then conduct themselves in a way that would be most appropriate for the Federal Reserve. I think I could do that. Like, I literally think I could do that. Not that I would want to. Like, I don't want to do that. Like, that's not, to me, that's not like something like I would find appealing in my life, is to trick the people into conducting so that the Federal Reserve can continue on with their fiat currency monetary system. That's not something I would want to do. I think I could. Like, I just think I could. All right. They wouldn't want you. No, they really wouldn't. All right. The inflation continues to rise. $1 bills will be worth 50 cents. Bitcoin changed my life for the better. I agree, Phil. Me too. All right. Don says, I know you talk over my head all the time. I'm not trying to. And that's one of the things, like, they drown you in jargon. Nah, that's the thing, Andre. Like, that's what they try to do. They try to drown people in the jargon, but the problem is that I've read through so much of their stuff, and I would take speeches like these, and I would just go over and over and over again every single word that they would say. And if they said something in there I didn't understand, I would research that until I understood it. And sometimes it would take me weeks to get through a speech. But I'm to the point now that I really see a lot of it. I see a lot of the issues that they were facing, and a lot of the communications that they are now using is credible threats, so that the people, the markets themselves, will conduct themselves in a way that just is most effective for achieving the Fed's monetary policy, or the dual mandate of low and stable prices and full employment. Like, I mean, I see a lot of articles. I see a lot of people out there talking in a way that sounds very familiar to, like, not only to what I would assume would have been the typical understanding of the Federal Reserve, but then very familiar to what I would have thought of the Federal Reserve, like, even up until I got the strategy. Like, if I didn't understand the strategy, I would be thinking this other way. Like, there would be nothing else out there that could say, hey, man, you're thinking incorrectly, except that I discovered it. Okay? And it literally took speeches spanning back 20 years ago and piecing them together over and over again, saying, hey, wait a minute, they're communicating this particular thing, right? And it's coming out. It's like they are revealing it over the years as it was going, and people are missing it. Like, even big time, full on, famous economists don't see it. They're not, they have missed it because they're not tracking it back far enough. They're thinking that conditions have changed the way that the Federal Reserve is viewing things. It's wrong. They're not. They have not changed the way they view things. They know that the lower bound of zero was a problem. They knew it 20 something years ago. They knew it was going to be about their communications. They knew that the communication styles and the tools that they were using, they would have to develop new ones and figure them out, the strategies and how to use these tools most effectively, coming up with ideas like the dot plot in order to communicate to the public, right? Because before, they didn't even know how to communicate to the public. They were like, man, what are we going to do to try and communicate these things? They're like, dot plot? Maybe we can do something like that and communicate that to them and give them, like, this perception of what it is that we're going to do. Like, you got to know that. Like, you got to know this was what they were doing. They were sitting around literally talking. This is like, how do we most effectively communicate our monetary policy to the public so that we don't really actually have to do anything, because doing anything doesn't work anymore. Like, that right there is so difficult for people to wrap their heads around. Like, they don't even know that's something that's going on. Right? And it's not me with a conspiracy theory thinking this or assuming this. This is from the Federal Reserve's own words, coming from their speeches that they are giving to the other bankers. These speeches are not intended for the public. They're totally accessible to the public. Nobody reads them, right? Nobody goes over and reads these things and scrutinizes them like I do, right? Like, I'm certain, I shouldn't say that. There's people out there who do. Not very many people on YouTube are doing that. That's what I should say. And providing this information for you. And every time I find Time Magazine or USA Today or somebody else literally spreading misinformation, guiding people right down the inflation expectation path in order for the Federal Reserve to conduct themselves the way they are. If they took the view of the uneducated economist, it would fail. The whole monetary policy and everything else would fail. And that's like the scariest part about it, is that like literally teetering on the edge of understanding and not understanding is the monetary system. And because nobody understands it and nobody is thinking about the flexible average inflation targeting as being the real monetary policy for the Fed, but actually thinks the Federal Reserve is going for a 2% target and that they can't achieve their goals of achieving that 2% target and that inflation is remaining elevated, is working for the Fed. That is allowing the Federal Reserve to continue to conduct themselves. That whole thing. It is not a problem for the Fed. That is a definite advantage. You know, all the articles, if you ever read an article saying the Fed doesn't know what to do, or the Fed is stuck, or the Fed has lost it, or something of that nature, absolutely incorrect. They have no idea about flexible average inflation targeting. Most people don't. 99.9% of the people have no idea about it. And that's why it's just so weird for me sitting here in this car talking so adamantly about it, saying that like literally every single person that I have ever heard talk about the Fed and their inflation target don't know. They literally don't know. Like every single person I have ever met. And I mean, at some point, I just finally start to think, it's just like, Jesus, I must be the crazy one. Like if nobody else sees it, I'm the only one, then I must be crazy, right? I must be a lunatic, completely fabricating this stuff up in my imagination. But yet, there's the speeches. There's their own words. There's Jerome Powell testifying to Congress. Congress straight up says to him, you are going to lower interest rates when you get to 2%. No. We are going for a 2% inflation over time. Nobody got it. Nobody got it. Right? Now, the people here on my channel, the viewers of this channel, those who have heard me say this stuff before, they do see it. They go, damn, it's right there. 2% over time. Not 2% target. Like when they do say 2% target, it's usually the opinion of the author of the article, not the opinion of the Federal Reserve itself. They'll use words like the 2% goal, 2% over time, 2%, in the long run. Right? But they don't use the 2% target in the fashion in which that a lot of people would assume that it is. Right? They are very careful with their words. And even when they do talk about the 2% target, they usually include the Fed's goal. And if you go and you look at the Fed's goal, it's to seek to achieve an inflation rate over time. Meaning there is going to be times in which that monetary policy would seek to achieve inflation that is moderately above 2% if the inflation scenario had been persistently below 2%. Okay. And this is what we were experiencing. So why it is that people would think that the Fed doesn't know what they're doing or is lost control or anything else is completely delusional thinking. If you go and you listen to the Fed for what it is that they were looking for, this is it. This is exactly what they were looking for. Elevated inflation expectation, a neutral interest rate that was rising, low and stable prices, which moderately above 2%, whatever the hell that means, right? And who the hell knows what percentage is low and stable, and full employment. All those things are happening, right? Like, again, people might disagree with the low and stable prices part of it, but there is no definition of what low and stable prices is. Or what moderately above 2% is. Wow, look at all these comments. Oh, there it was. There was another super chat. Oh, here we go. Any anonymous scuba? Anonymous cube? Is that what it is? Anonymous. Thank you for the dollar, or what is that, a euro? Thank you for the euro. All right. I know debt has been around for a long time and it's ruined many, many nations. That's why it should be illegal. Well, okay, but Cantillon talks about how hard currency, right, back 200 years ago, will also ruin a nation once the manufacturers start to leave. Once the people have created a situation within the economy that they are producers and savers and elevated their standard of living, they will start to produce or start to buy the production of the foreign countries out there, right? They start buying foreign production, and the domestic manufacturers start to leave, right? And there's really nothing that you can do about that if you have a fixed currency like gold or Bitcoin or silver or anything else. This is what Cantillon was describing from hundreds of years ago, the increase and decrease of money into the state and the reasonings that it happens. And ultimately, you're going to have money come into the state through productions, through like saving and production, being an industrious people, and all the money is going to leave the country if you raise your standard of living. That's it. That's like the two directions that it can go. And if you want to enjoy that money, you are going to send that money over to foreign production. It'll take time to start doing it, but it will happen. Like, it's just like, it's an economic force that you cannot change. And without the subsidies and tariffs of the government control and ever increasing amounts of it, there's nothing you're going to do to change it. And in fact, it won't change even with that. What it'll do is those economic forces will grow in the background. It'll be, how long are we going to go for, guys? Are we going to go 3 hours? I don't know, man. This is a long one. Cantillon ruined his life for exactly the same reason. Schnozberries. All right. Let's see here. If there's nothing any of us can do, what do we put up with? Okay, if nothing we can do, why do we put up with it? We either have decadence or devastation. It's insane. Okay, well, yeah. When you say there's nothing you can do about it, what are you going to do? I mean, are you going to do nothing? Like, are you just going to, like, go lay out in the yard and die? Like, of course not, right? You're going to do something. You're going to get out there and you're going to do something. Now, the idea that you're going to try and create a situation within the environment, within the economy, it's going to be everlasting, that's not going to happen. Right? I mean, I don't know, maybe somebody can come up with an idea. They try to all the time, like all these governments and everything that's going on. That's what they're trying to do, is trying to keep this thing everlasting. Right? Like, what do we need to do? Well, you can't stop the people from enjoying themselves, right? You can't stop the people from being producers and savers, because that's what people do. They produce and save. And you can't stop the people from enjoying it, because once they produce and save, they want to enjoy that production and savings. Those two things cannot change, right? And I know, like, there was this wonderful idea that we can create a situation and that it would always be the same for everybody all the time for generations to come, and we can all sing Kumbaya and hold hands and sing peaceful love, right? I mean, there's like, it doesn't, like, sounds great, right? I mean, it sounds wonderful, but like, it doesn't happen. This is humans. This is the wild. It's nature. And I understand that there is civilized concepts that we can bring to our society that can make it a little bit more pleasant, but the underlying forces that are at play will not change. Right? And there's some things that aren't going to change, like the conditions in which that the economy is operating in. If you are producer saver, that means you don't have a whole lot going on in your life, right? That's the reason why you're producing and saving. Like, I mean, if you had everything that you had going on, like if you had everything that you need, why would you go out there and produce and save? That doesn't make any sense. Like, just go and enjoy your life. You already got everything you need. But if you don't have anything in your life, well, shit, you're going to go out there and you're going to produce and save. Well, things change. Once you have been a producer and saver, you don't want to be a producer saver anymore. You've changed. You want to change into enjoying your production and savings. So people say, no, we had a country in which we were producers and savers. Yeah, but we changed, right? We're not the producers and savers anymore. We enjoyed the production and savings by spending that money on foreign production, which screwed up the environment. So now we've changed into something else, right? It's just the way it is. Like, if we were still those poor people who didn't have anything, hardcore working farmers of the American, societies out there, we would not be in the condition in which we would be in a different condition. We would be producer savers then. Right? See, that's why like people say like, well, we used to have it back in the day. Yeah, but the people were different back then too, right? I mean, it's like nowadays we're not the same people. We're not doing the same things. Let's see here. What are you going to enjoy if everything is closed? All right. In fact, you can sit in the car. The fact that you can sit in the car and not be interrupted is remarkable. Well, I'm at the house by myself right now. The kids are at school, wife's at work, mom's in town, so yeah, I'm just hanging out by myself. Sister went home. Sister was hanging out with me for a while. She went back up to Washington. All right, what about the people who live off the government and don't contribute anything but consume? What about them? Cantillon's debacle was called the Mississippi Company. Oh yeah, right? Yeah, old Cantillon, he was mixed in with a lot of stuff. Like he was a hardcore banker back in the day. You know, I'm not trying to say like Cantillon was some awesome dude either. Right? I'm just saying his economic theory was very telling of the way that money flows into a system, how that money starts, you know, circulating through society, what it does to separate the rich from the poor, how it starts driving out the foreign or driving out the domestic manufacturers and drives in foreign production. I mean, dude was very intelligent when it came to all that stuff. I'm not trying to say he's some awesome dude. I mean, he might have been a real jerk in his life. I mean, I don't know. I don't know anything about his personal life or anything like that. He certainly wasn't like, you know, I don't think he was somebody who like, you know, wanted to contribute like, you know, mass charity to the poor or something like that either. I don't think that was his ideas or anything, but you know, whatever. All right, there's another one. Let's go check it out. Larry Bird with the $4.99. How do you become a salesperson? I've always worked with my hands and I have shitty social skills, convo skills. Okay, Larry Bird. Well, that's the number one problem is the energy that you are carrying right off the bat, right? So you have to be able to have a conversational skill. And this is what's funny about most really, really good sales people that I know is almost every single one of them is an introvert. They're introverted people. Like they do not go out there and like socialize with a bunch of people and, you know, go and have a bunch of small talking groups and stuff like that. For the most part, they are only social for their job. That's it. That's the only time. And the reason why they're only social for their job is because it's an act, right? They are literally acting, right? And this is the best part of a salesman is how well they can act, because you can't show your true feelings, right? You might be sitting there in front of somebody who has bad breath, bad attitude, bad everything going on, and you have to be nice. Like you have to treat them with, you have to be courteous and nice and polite and friendly and all the other stuff that you typically would not do with this person because they are not the type of energy that you would typically want to be around. Right? And you have to understand that, but this is your job. This is what you do. This is what you have to do. And so you have to, hey, good morning. How are you doing today? What is it that I can get for you? Right? Rehearsed line right off the bat. Oh yeah, what is it? Oh, okay, sure. What is it that you know, you need some decking today? Yeah. Do you have any kind of idea on the decking you're looking for? Would you like to check out some composite samples? All right. I mean, again, it's all acting, right? And it's all about like trying to, you know, keep that good, fresh, high energy thing going. Yeah? And it's in literally, you can feel it on the inside. It's just like actually enjoy the sale. Right? Like that's what I mean, when I'm doing sales, I'm enjoying it. Like even if I'm dealing with somebody who might be like, you know, somebody who's unpleasant or something like that, I typically enjoy doing the sales. Like I enjoy like getting through the whole process, finding the right products, ordering it all up, doing the paperwork. Even the paperwork's kind of fun to do, right? I mean, it's just, you know, it's just work, right? Work's fun sometimes. But it's the understanding that what you are doing is you are trying to maintain a particular energy, right? With that person. It's a high energy, it's friendly energy, it's trusting energy. This is the energy that you want to have and carry. So if you don't have any social skills, that's what you have to learn, right? Is that particular thing, is that, you know, you have to carry this friendly thing going about it. After that, being a salesman is really pretty easy. If you take into some considerations of things that you don't or you shouldn't do, sales becomes very just flowing, right? It just becomes something that just naturally occurs. And like the number one thing I think, like a lot of times people who are trying to get into sales for the first time, that they end up focusing too much on is the money part of it. Like the actual transaction, getting the money, right? Making that part of it. And to me, that's like the last thing. Like that's at the very end of the whole bit. Like the money is like the least important part of the transaction, even though it's the number one part of the whole transaction is the money. To me, like what I am looking at, what I'm trying to do, all the other stuff when it comes to interaction with the customer, the money is the last part of it. Really, what it comes down to is making sure that you know that what the customers want, because a lot of times the customer doesn't even know what they want. They're coming in, I'm looking for the possibilities of something. So it becomes the appropriate questions that you're going for, something like this, and it really comes down to understanding your product. Like for example, somebody comes in and says, hey, I'm looking for the decking exam, some decking, new deck. I want a new deck. Well, there's a lot of questions. Somebody might just leave it alone saying, okay, well, what kind of deck you want? I don't know. Well, the samples are over there. Let me know what you want. Right? Like to leave it alone like that, to me, that's not doing sales, right? Sales is, you need a deck. I'm here to converse with you and show you and talk with you everything that needs to happen in order for you to acquire the product that you need. My first question is, oh, really? New deck? Is this or you need decking? Okay. New deck, or is this a replacement? Oh, it's a replacement deck. Okay. Is this, on a fairly new house or an older house? What kind of house is it that you have going on? Oh, it's a new house that you have. Why are you replacing the deck? Are the deck boards bad? Oh, I see. They got damage from whatever. A tree fell on it. I see. So are you looking to replace it with exactly what you have? Oh, no, you're looking to upgrade it a little bit. Okay. You see all these questions that are going into it? It's just like, you just start guiding them right down the process of it. It's just like, so why are you considering composite? Oh, because of the maintenance of it? Yeah. Are you is this something that you entertain on a lot? Are you going to be spending a lot of time on this deck? Like, you see these questions that come up. I mean, I'm already selling you a decking project, and you don't even want one, right? You're already answering these questions. You're thinking, well, maybe I do want a new deck, So this is guiding them right into it. All right, here we go. 5 from artificial. What is that? Artificial impulse? All right. In a globalized system, won't the Cantillon effect eventually take place in countries like China, meaning that over a century, world economies, or in a century, all economies even out? No, and the reason is that there is always, like in Cantillon's day, there would always be a rebalancing taking place between the producers, savers, and the higher standard of living. Like there would always be this move of the money moving to the most industrious people, and eventually, leaving the luxurious life of those people and moving over to the industrious people again. So it's like wherever the gold would follow to, right? But things have changed in the way that the Cantillon effect works. Now, it still works in the sense that manufacturing bases will leave, but the gold hoard, which would typically be redistributed, ended up staying at the United States. And the fiat currency in the use of U.S. treasuries ended up being the replacement for the gold standard. Now, it doesn't mean that China won't suffer some of the effects of the Cantillon, right? Because now you think about what China is going through. During Nixon times, when they severed this gold standard, China became the manufacturer, right? There was even communications with the administration in China to do this. So now the ramping up of manufacturing in China started to take place. The United States was issuing out debt. We were bringing in new money from the debt issuance and buying the production of China. Now, this worked out really well for China because China is now getting new money in from manufacturers, like the United States used to be, right? The United States was a manufacturing powerhouse. They were producing stuff, got all the gold, but we didn't want to redistribute the gold back out, so we held the gold, started issuing out that treasury debt. China became the manufacturing powerhouse. They started getting new money in that way. They started raising their standard of living, and now they are suffering the consequences of that. They have a very particular strategy that you can see is at play. If they were to just sit there and go, oh, well, dang, there's nothing we can do. We're just going to have to watch our manufacturers leave our nation. Because that's essentially what ended up happening is that China, being the manufacturing powerhouse now, increased their standard of living. Their labor market now becomes more expensive than that of Vietnam or Malaysia or Mexico or someplace else. Right? So now, because of that rise in standard of living due to the manufacturing that had taken place over the last few decades, in raising their standard of living, they're going to lose their manufacturing base. So China has taken on a very particular strategy. So that's the Cantillon effect taking place right now in China, right? If China was to sit there and go like, oh crap, there's nothing we can do, then all their manufacturers would eventually find some other place that's cheaper to distribute from or to produce from, and China would be out of the game. But China's not going to play that. What China is doing is they are ramping up and overproducing, right? They are moving into overproduction right now, knowing that this isn't going to end well, right? They know that they're going to flood the markets. They know that there's going to be a crash of manufacturing taking place due to all the massive production that they are doing. Now, the idea that China has behind it is that even though that they are going to suffer the consequences of a lot of manufacturers that are going to fail, they are going to destroy the manufacturers that are trying to establish themselves around the world, seeing as how China is already well established. So yes, China will lose some manufacturers in this process, but the other manufacturers around the world who are trying to compete against this will also fail, leaving China the only one who has more manufacturing that is established and able to continue on through this manufacturing hell to pay, like this Armageddon that's going to happen. You can already see the beginnings of it. Look how much effort is taking place right now to try and prevent China from shipping goods out, right? I mean, like France is complaining, the United States is complaining big time. Yeah. So in a sense, like the Cantillon effect back in the day, yes, it would be finding balancing acts between the most industrious nations and the nations who had a higher standard of living. There would always be this balancing act kind of taking place between them. They would fight wars and do other stuff to try and prevent the inevitable outcome. So, but yeah, there would always be this balancing act taking place. Wow, I can't believe we've been out here this long. We were almost 3 hours into it with still 600 people watching. That's incredible. I can't believe it. I don't think I've ever had this many people out here for this long. All right. Closing the sale as soon as possible holds intrinsic value. Yeah. Time is money. Time is money, right? Okay. Lucky for us, China's biggest problem is its raising population, a bit of luck that will erode. What is going on? Okay, lucky for us, China's biggest problem is its rising population. Well, I think their problem is that they actually have a decreasing population. They have a problem with a regeneration of new people coming in. Right? They're going to actually suffer the consequences of having a diminishing population without having a replacement coming in at a timely manner, right? Like the die-off is going to happen faster than the rebirth, and that's going to be very devastating to the economy, right? To their economy. Older people are a burden on the economy, not a burden, so to speak, but they're not a major contributor. Like when you are younger trying to raise family, you spend a lot of money active and participate in the economy a hell of a lot more than if you're old with all the assets that you could ever really want. And you're just kind of spending money on your good time, good time, on the rest of your life, just trying to get by or whatever it is. You're not participating in the economy as much as, say, the younger generation would, or the younger, the younger population would, and since they're not really active in family and formation and stuff like that, it's going to be devastating to the economy. Kashkari, higher for longer, All right. 500 million people in China are senior citizens and 700 million are over 65. What is your simplified take on physical gold holding as the only investment? Thank you for the effort. Pleasant and informative. Thank you, Ottoman. Or Oatman. I can't really read that. My eyes are getting a little blurry. I'm gonna have to call it quits here soon. All right. Physical hold as the only investment. No, don't do. I wouldn't do that, and I wouldn't consider gold the investment. I consider it a speculation or an insurance policy, but that's it. Right. An investment is something that pays you. Right. You have to remember, and maybe it's just the way you phrased it, but I mean, I take a very serious difference when it comes to this word, right? Investment. Investment is something that pays you. Rental property, dividend paying stock in a company that's going to grow, rental property, whatever, right? There's something that you're going to put money towards, and then you're going to see some kind of return from this, right? When you buy a speculation, you are buying an item like gold, you are intending on selling it for a higher price, right? So this is a speculation. It's not an investment. This just sits there, right? A lot of people don't like it when I say it, but it's the greater fool theory, right? You're going to sell it to the greater fool. Somebody's going to pay a higher price than what you paid for it. Now, that's just a phrase that they use. It doesn't mean that you were foolish for buying gold. It's just the term that they use, right? But that's really what it is that you are intending on selling this for a higher price. So you are hoping and wishing that somebody will do that in the future. There might be a lot of reasonings behind it, and some of them might be very based behind it. But it's still, that's what it is. So as the only investment, hell no, man. Like, I wouldn't even only speculate in that stuff. Now, I do have a decent amount, and I do like having that to be outside of that third-party claim, which means that if there was any situation that ever came up in which that I needed money, I don't have to go to a third party. I don't have to go to a bank. I don't have to go to a stockbroker. I don't have to do anything. I will have to take it out and go and cash it at the coin dealer, to get the cash part of it. But it's in my possession. It's away from them, right? So anything that they do doesn't affect me when it comes to that portion of things, right? What up, dude? Freddie just got home. What's happening, man? I'm live streaming right now. How was school? Good. Want to say hi?
Hi.
Yeah, right on, man. You can do weight training here in a little bit?
Yeah.
What time does that start?
Starts at 4.
At 4? Okay, cool. Yeah, Mom should be home soon. All right. Powell is very correct. About what? All right. Gold is way better than silver. I kind of see them as the same. Like, there's major differences between the two, but for all intent purposes of what I'm doing with it, it's the same. As Powell said, the U.S. is too focused on short-term gains as opposed to long-term sustainability. Hi, Freddie. Right on. All right. Thank you, Osama, for becoming a member of the channel. I think I'll probably be doing another members-only video. I'm going to try and get at least one out a week, once a week, in order to keep the membership, fairly active on it. If I can get more out, I will. But I'm going to definitely do at least one and try and do it with, again, with these speeches that are coming from the Federal Reserve, breaking those things down to truly understand what it is that they are trying to communicate to us. All right, we just hit 1,000 likes. Nice. Thank you for hitting that like button. We got 1,001 likes going on. This is just incredible. Thank you so much for hitting that. It's probably one of the best live streams that I've had going in a very long time. I think it's probably the best one ever. All right, and it's definitely one of the longest ones. My gosh, 3 hours now. UE, you need to check out and read The Worldly Philosophers by Robert Hullaburn. Worldly Philosophers. I might give it a audiobook listen. Let me see here. Let me just write this down. The Worldly Philosophers. All right, that should be easy enough. Thank you, Daniel, for the suggestion. Sup, little man? Right on. Oh, Freddie's the coolest, isn't he? Simon, yesterday you did not answer my question. What is more profitable for the Fed, high inflation or low inflation? Well, the Federal Reserve is I mean, I would think that low inflation is probably in a more profitable position, considering that when they raised the interest rates, they actually created a problem with their assets becoming less valuable. But give it time, those assets on the balance sheet should start to flip into a profitable position if the interest rates remain elevated. So give it time, they probably would become more profitable with an elevated interest rate than they would be at a lesser interest rate. But considering that once they raised the interest rate, they actually became unprofitable and started going into remittance to the Treasury, where they actually owe the Treasury money right now. And they're going to be in that position until, I forget, I think it's like for a few more years. If I remember right, it's like 2 or 3 more years that they're going to end up being in this position of owing the Treasury money. Like literally the Fed owes the Treasury money. Now, when things aren't that way and the Fed does turn a profit, they have their expenses, operating costs. I think they do a little bit of profit for whatever reasons on it, but it's not much. Everything else gets turned back over to the Treasury. So it's actually a deficit reducer when the Federal Reserve becomes profitable, because all the profit that they make goes back to the Treasury itself. Like a lot of people don't realize that, and that's what's going on. However, the problems that I see within this system is that just because the Federal Reserve and the profit doesn't necessarily go to a private people or whatever, it goes back to the Treasury, doesn't mean that the people operating within that system aren't taking advantage of the knowledge and the information and the movement that they are creating, right? Like even during the pandemic, there was a couple of Fed officials who had to resign for insider trading. They were like, well, we're going to do this insider trade. We know we're going to get in trouble for it. We're not going to go to jail. We may end up paying a fine. We're certainly going to lose our job, but hell, it's worth it in the end. And they did it. Like they literally did that. Like some of these Fed officials, these voting members of the FOMC, or whatever. I don't know if they were voting members, but these Fed officials did. And I was just like, holy shit, is this not going to be bigger news for people? That the people who are conducting monetary policy literally got busted for insider trading, quit their job, and nothing happened. And everybody's just like, and I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. Yeah, it's pretty typical. I mean, like, I don't know why I'm like, why would that be any different? Whatever. It doesn't make any difference. All right. Insider trading is rampant on Capitol Hill, where those couple of Fed officials, the good old boys who were honest. Yeah, I mean, it's just like, isn't that sad to think? It's just like, yeah, we know we're going to get in trouble. We know we're going to lose our job. We know we're going to be fined for it and probably get a bad reputation for it, but it's worth it. It's just, like this is our lives here. Like, I don't get that opportunity, to say, oh, well, I know I'm going to lose my job and all that. And, but, I'm in a very unique position in which that I can take some serious advantage of. Like, whatever, it's just like, that's why I just don't care anymore. It's like, yeah, they do it. They're good. They did it. They're going to do it. They're going to do it again. Right. And there's going to be some more of it. And I'm not going to care when they do it again, because I know that they're going to, and there's nothing I can do about it. And even if there was something I could do about it, it isn't anything that's going to be punishable, because they just get away with it. It's like, well, you get a bad rap. So what, right? You don't go to jail. You just pay a fine, which is the cost of doing business. All right, Jamie Dimon has done the same thing in the past. Take a fine for a bigger reward. That's right. The fine itself, like literally the fine is known. That is incorporated into the business model, saying, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to get fined, so we're going to lose $100 million because of that, but we will gain $350 million for it. Cool. Still profitable. Like they literally do it knowing that they're going to be fined for it. Like, so what's the point, right? Like, what's the point of the fine? Like, I don't even, like, the fine is supposed to be a deterrent, but instead the fine is used as operation cost. It's sad. The fine is a slap on the hand for the rich. It is. The cost of doing business. The only fat check you at the airport. The only fat check you at the airport. There you go. Yeah. No worries, but be nice. Okay. The cost of doing business. Yep. Okay. A weaker U.S. dollar is more profitable for the Fed. That is why they keep inflation as high as possible. Well, I mean, okay. If inflation, if the inflation is high as possible, like, see, here's the thing that I have a problem with when it comes to like the idea that the Federal Reserve is trying to keep inflation as high as possible, is that they couldn't get inflation from quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4. So when I hear that they want to keep, inflation as high as possible, right? Like, I think that they were trying to figure out how they could get inflation at all, even with all the money printing. See, this is where, like, a lot of people, like, they don't question that. Like, they don't question that whole thing. See, like, when I see the money printer go off, I'm like, man, this is going to be an inflationary pressure. How is that going to occur, considering that the inflationary pressures that should have come from 1, 2, 3, and 4 failed? So now I understand that there's going to be something different that is going to create the inflationary scenario. And that's the whole, like, part about this is, like, it's now gone from like a very mechanical financial system, all right? Interest rates here, bonds, establishment of reserves, like, limited reserves on the banking system to regulate, right? All this stuff was very mechanical, right? How much do you have in this account? How much do you have? Like, all this other stuff. And that worked really well, this mechanical version of the economy, to be able to, like, adjust interest rates down and then actually have an impact onto the economy. But eventually you get down to zero and it's no longer an effective tool. Everything has gone from mechanical to psychological, right? It's literally a psychological game. It's like almost the difference. Here we go. Instead of taking a real vacation, you take a total recall vacation, right? Same thing. Like, this is literally what people think they went on a real vacation. They're not, right? They're just got this image implanted into them. It's psychological. Same thing with monetary policy now. Like, the mechanical version of it doesn't work. The psychological version is what's being played. All right. 3 hours. Okay, guys, I think we got to call it quits, man. I mean, 3 hours into this, I would love to stay out here and just keep going. We have so many people watching. 600 people. It just drives me nuts to kill it. 1,049 likes. This is by far the most popular live stream that I have ever done, man. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. This has been so much fun. And we covered a lot of stuff. I think, like, some of the things that we communicate through on this channel, especially when it comes to the monetary policy, again, I think this is so important to our daily lives, and it's something that is just not talked about very much out there. So this is like the place. This is it. This is where we get it. This is where the information is, like, really broken down so that we can, like, each look at it for ourselves to know and understand how it is that we can use this information for ourselves. Nobody's going to be in a position like you are. Right? I'm not in your position. You're not in my position. But the information that we take may be the same, but what we do with it is going to be different. You take the information and you run with it the way you need to, and I'm going to run with it the way I need to. And sometimes that may look the same, and other times it may be very different. But the fact is that we're all going to have to run from the bear when it comes into camp, and we definitely don't want to be the slowest person in the camp, right? So there's other people out there who are not taking in the information. They're not going to know what to do. We see it coming. We understand what it is that we need to do for our own position based on the ideas that we have filtered through on this monetary policy and everything that's with it. So, okay, so much fun, so exciting, such a good time. All-nighter, man. I just finally caught your comment. Thank you, Simon and Wayne, for the ride. Oh, yeah, you bet, man. Thanks for the info and opinion. Good chat room. Yeah. All right, we all come for the wailing dice. Yeah. Welcome. Bye, Simon. Try to talk to I allegedly. I look forward to listening later. Right on, all-nighter. It was a long one here, man, but it was a good one. Look forward to seeing you here in a couple of days off to the Rebel Capitalist. Super excited about that. So, all right, I'm going to go talk with Fred. See you guys. Oh, wait a minute. I didn't say uneducated economist. You guys let me know. There we go.